Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. That September evening changed how I think about what's possible in our skies. I was making my usual flight home in my Cessna 172, a route I'd taken hundreds of times before. The sun had set about 20 minutes ago, leaving that strange twilight where it's not quite day, not quite night. A cool breeze gently rocked my wings as I cruised at 500 feet above the farmland outside Wichita, Kansas. The first sign that this wouldn't be a normal flight came when something caught my eye above the cornfields to my right. Most pilots would assume it was another aircraft or maybe a drone, and that's exactly what I thought at first. But this object didn't fit any normal explanation. It was this metallic thing, catching the last bits of daylight, shaped like a flattened diamond with smooth edges. No blinking lights, no engine noise, just this silent, shiny shape floating there. My mind jumped to rational explanations. Maybe some new military prototype they were testing. That theory went out the window when it moved. The object made this perfect 90-degree turn to the left, like it was gliding on invisible tracks. There was no buildup of speed, no slowing down, it just turned. As someone who flies for a living, I know that's not how things work in the air. Any normal aircraft pulling a move like that would tear itself apart. I sat there stunned for a few seconds, watching it disappear behind some trees. Then my pilot instincts kicked in, and I adjusted course to follow it. But by the time I cleared those trees, the object had vanished completely. The sky was empty. I checked all my instruments, everything looked normal, no weird readings or radio interference. It was just me up there, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Just after 8 p.m., I landed at my home airstrip, my hands still trembling from what I'd seen. The flight back had been quiet, but what waited for me on the ground would prove more unsettling than anything I'd witnessed in the air. Two men stood by my truck, dressed in plain black uniforms without any badges or insignia. They watched silently as I completed my shutdown checklist and climbed down from the plane. Their presence felt official, government or military maybe, but something was off. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to break the heavy silence. One of them stepped forward with an odd question. "Do you believe in physics or just experience?" I stumbled over my words, confused. "What do you mean?" The second man pulled out a small black box with a screen and buttons, quietly working with it while I glanced nervously between them and the empty runway. Despite my unease, I managed to tell them about the metallic object I'd seen up there, how it moved in ways that defied explanation. "Hey guys, sorry for interrupting. If you really like this kind of content, please let me know. Like and subscribe. It will help this small community. And if you have ever encountered a mystery by yourself, comment down below. We all want to hear your story next." "We know," the man with the device said simply. His partner followed up. "Did it seem like it was aware of you watching?" I took my time answering, questioning my own perceptions. Finally, I admitted that while it hadn't made noise or shown lights, its movements felt deliberate, intentional. They shared a look before one stated flatly, "Things like that don't just happen by accident. You've seen some plastic in a dare thing you shouldn't have." When I asked who they were, they ignored the question. Instead, they left me with a simple message: "You'll hear from us again. Until then, keep your experience to yourself." Without another word, they got into an unmarked black SUV and drove away, leaving me alone with my questions. In the days that followed, nothing came of their visit. I told only Lisa, and even then, I held back most details. The whole thing sounded too incredible to believe. The strange events began during my wildlife research near Ashland, Oregon last September. I'm Jen Marshall, a wildlife biologist studying owl and bat movements in the forest. My work involved long nights in a small trailer at the edge of a clearing, monitoring the tagged animals we were tracking. The first unusual incident happened around 11 p.m. on a perfectly still night that smelled of pine needles and damp earth. When I stepped out to check the motion sensors by the tree line, I noticed a faint glow hovering about 100 feet above the trees. What happened next would change how I viewed my familiar research grounds forever. Flying over that patch of farmland became increasingly unsettling. I constantly felt watched, occasionally spotting something reflective at the forest's edge that vanished whenever I approached. My equipment started behaving strangely too. The radio would crackle with unexplained static bursts on clear frequencies, and my handheld GPS regularly lost signal in that exact spot. though all other instruments worked perfectly. The effects followed me home. My wife Lisa noticed I seemed different after flights, saying I looked tense, like I was carrying an invisible burden. The validation I needed came from Mr. Jenkins, a former crop duster pilot. When I told him about my experiences, expecting disbelief, he simply nodded and said others had seen strange things in that area for years, though nobody discussed it openly. I continued flying but avoided that airspace whenever possible. While the mysterious men in black never appeared again, something remained. Even now, during solo flights, when the light hits just right, I catch that same inexplicable gleam in my peripheral vision. It leaves me wondering what's really out there and whether they're still watching. The silence caught my attention first. A light hung above the trees, the kind of pale white glow with a touch of blue that you'd expect from a drone or small helicopter. But there wasn't a sound. No buzz, no rotor noise, nothing at all. It just stayed there, perfectly still, in a way that seemed unnatural. The forest is never truly quiet. After years of fieldwork, I know there's always some noise, wildlife, planes, something. I tried telling myself it must be some aircraft I wasn't familiar with, but everything felt off. When I grabbed my phone for a photo, the camera struggled. The light wouldn't focus right, like it was too bright or messing with the sensor somehow. Then it just vanished. There one moment, gone the next. I checked my research equipment later. The motion sensors and cameras showed nothing unusual, no aircraft, no strange light, just normal forest activity. Owl calls and bat movements continued like any other night. I watched for it to return over the next few days, but the light never showed up again. Things got stranger about a week later. I was in my research trailer one evening, working with some samples, when someone knocked on the door. Two men stood outside wearing dark suits and plain black coats. They had laminated ID cards hanging from chains, but no official badges or uniforms. They introduced themselves as Agents Blake and Crane from some federal wildlife compliance office I'd never heard of. When they started asking about unusual activity and owl migrations in the area, I got nervous. I thought about the light, but kept my answer vague, just telling them everything seemed normal with the owls and bats. Agent Crane didn't seem to buy it. Blake mentioned they'd been looking at my recent reports, calling them imaginative, and saying they were there to help get the records in order. They wanted to see my notes and raw data files. I agreed, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. It started as a simple escape, a weekend hike I'd spent weeks planning. As Mark, I just wanted to break free from city noise and deadlines. But what happened in that forest changed everything. The first sign came when two men showed up at my trailer. They stayed for about an hour, leaving behind a sealed folder marked corrected data. When I opened it later, I found what looked like my own reports, but the numbers were off. The movement patterns had been smoothed out, with key details mysteriously missing. The strangeness escalated quickly. My attempts to contact the agency they claimed to represent led nowhere, dead phone numbers and blank stares from officials. Then the wildlife started acting wrong. Dead birds appeared without explanation. The bats vanished completely. The local wildlife center dismissed my reports, saying no one else had noticed anything unusual. The forest itself felt different, especially at night. Shadow movements flickered at the edge of my vision near the tree line. A strange humming sound filled the air sometimes, but the sky remained empty of aircraft. Technology started failing me too. My phone picked up weird static, the camera developed interference, and my laptop died completely the day after those men visited. My research became impossible. Every time I got close to something significant, my data would vanish. Notes disappeared from files, while the mysterious men never returned. PTR 77 physically. Their presence lingered in odd ways, like people mentioning wildlife compliance checks that officially never happened. I eventually moved my trailer a few miles away and took a break from fieldwork. Something fundamental had shifted in the forest after that night with the light. These days I still visit occasionally to look at the trees, but I've stopped expecting to see anything unusual. There's no dramatic ending to this story. No UFO, no alien beings, just an unexplained light, two out-of-place men, and a forest that lost its natural rhythm. I've always been drawn to Oregon's remote corners, even though I call Portland home. At 35, Reynolds and I have explored plenty of hidden spots, but this October trip was different. I picked a trail that winds past an old Cold War radar station in the Cascades, the kind of place tourists skip and only locals really know about. The radar installation was mostly gone when I arrived, just concrete foundations and some rusty antenna pieces jutting from the ground. I made camp near the old site, just beyond where the trees thin out. The weather had turned cold and damp, typical for late October in these parts. Around 7 that evening, everything changed. A strange, deep hum filled the air, not like any machine or wildlife I'd ever heard. It seemed to pulse through both ground and air, coming from somewhere past the tree line. When I went to investigate with my flashlight, I saw them. Pale blue lights, like orbs, drifting silently between the trees. They moved with an eerie purpose, but in the thick darkness I couldn't tell how many there were or what was causing them. I retreated quietly to my camp, keeping my phone close, but staying silent. The rational part of my brain suggested drones or researchers, but there were no voices, no equipment sounds, just that constant, deep humming. My sleep that night was restful, interrupted by frequent checks on the mysterious sounds. The next morning, I hiked further up the trail looking for clues, but found nothing unusual. The forest had returned to its normal self, just wind in leaves and birds calling in the distance. Later, back at my rental cabin 10 miles from the trailhead, I sat outside under the clear, cold night sky. A black sedan, probably newer, cruised slowly past on the nearby road. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Late-night drivers weren't uncommon out here. For 3 nights straight, a black car haunted the road by my cabin. It came like clockwork, every hour on the hour, gliding past without any lights, no headlights, no brake lights, nothing. The car never changed speed, just kept that same steady pace each time. I tried getting its attention with my flashlight, but it was like I didn't exist. The whole situation felt off. I checked for power issues in the area, thinking maybe there was some problem with the road's electricity, but every other light worked fine. When I brought it up to a local at a diner in town, he got strange. "You sure it wasn't just a truck?" he asked. When I described the no-light situation and the precise timing, he just shrugged and said something cryptic about people keeping watch on the place. That night brought more oddness. After another drive-by from the mystery car, I caught that faint humming sound outside. I stood at my window staring into the dark forest, but couldn't spot anything unusual. The next day, I hiked back to check the radar site. The air felt thick and heavy in the forest. At the site, I found fresh cracks in the concrete slabs, like something massive had recently crushed them. I took photos but couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and I decided to leave first thing in the morning. I locked up everything tight at night, trying to shake off the creepy feeling that something was close by. Around midnight, the humming started again, louder this time, making the whole cabin vibrate. When I looked out, there was the black car, stopped right across the street. It sat there, completely dark, until its door opened and someone got out. In the darkness, I couldn't make out any details about the figure. It all started during my drive home to Little Rock from Ma, Arkansas, after a client meeting. A routine 3-hour journey turned into something I still can't fully explain. I left around 7 p.m., hoping to avoid the midnight fog typical for that time of year. My GPS suggested a detour near Forge Mountain to bypass construction around Ola. The route seemed ordinary enough, just another country road with scattered pine trees and utility poles. After about 30 minutes without seeing another vehicle, I spotted a radio tower to my left, barely visible through the trees. Arkansas has plenty of these red and white striped towers with blinking beacons. But this one felt different. The first thing that struck me was the silence. No insects, no tree frogs, unusual for late September. Then my car started behaving strangely. The engine's RPMs dropped and stayed low despite pressing the gas. My headlights grew dim and the dashboard flickered. I noticed the tower's beacon had stopped blinking, showing only a steady red glow. That's when I saw something above the tower. About 50 feet higher, and off to the side, there was this massive dark shape, like an upside-down dinner plate, completely motionless in the air. No lights, no reflections. I wouldn't have spotted it if I hadn't been staring at the beacon. I slowed down and saw a car with no lights parked ahead. Someone in dark clothing stepped out, stood still for a minute, then got back in. The car drove away silently, still without lights. Sleep was impossible that night. I packed up and left early the next morning. I've avoided that area ever since. Even now, weeks later, sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that low hum again. I question whether my memory is accurate, but one thing's certain. Something happened that night, something real. Everything happened in sequence, like dominoes falling. My car slowed down on its own, creeping halfway onto the shoulder. I noticed the radio wasn't making any sound, though I hadn't turned it off. The display showed nothing, no signal, no time, just empty digits and white static. Then, without any warning, the engine died completely. The car's behavior became increasingly strange. The cabin light switched on by itself. A burst of hot air shot from the AC vents despite being set to cool. I tried the key, nothing, not even a clicking sound. My hands trembled, but I wasn't cold. Everything felt off, like my senses were delayed. That's when I looked toward the tower. Its red warning light had gone dark. Above it hovered something I couldn't quite make out, just a dark shape against the sky, slightly wider than the tower's platform and about half its height. The silence was unnatural. At that distance, I should have heard some kind of mechanical noise. The object moved in a way that defied physics. It glided sideways about 20 feet, then sank behind the tree line as if floating through water. No jerky movements, no sound, just smooth motion that ignored gravity. After it vanished, the tower's red light blinked once. The radio suddenly came back on mid-song and the headlights brightened. The engine started perfectly when I tried it again. I didn't stay to investigate. Flooring the gas pedal, I fishtailed onto the main road and didn't stop shaking until I reached Darnell. By the time I got home at 12:30, I'd convinced myself not to tell anyone, not my boss, roommate, or parents. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just tired, maybe the car just hiccuped, maybe that thing was just a trick of light. The next morning changed everything. While cleaning pine needles off my windshield, a black Crown Vic with tinted windows and a small antenna parked across the street. A man in a suit stepped out. White, mid-50s, no badge or clipboard. He walked up like someone used to getting his way, stopped 6 feet from me, and smiled. I nodded automatically. He pulled out a folded paper from his coat, mentioning he was there about my vehicle malfunction from the previous night. That morning at Devil's Spine started like any other surf day. I was there early, 4:45 a.m., trying to beat the crowds like I always did. I'm Evan, 31, working part-time at a hardware store in Santa Rosa. Since moving from inland, surfing's become my escape, the one thing that truly calms my mind. The spot's a stretch of cliff north of Bodega Bay, where the waves break clean before the wind kicks up. Locals know it, but it's remote enough to stay quiet, especially at that hour. Something felt different that morning, though. The air had this weird metallic smell, not exactly rotten, but definitely off. And the tide, it was creeping in unusually slow, the foam barely touching the usual spots on the rocks. I got into my wetsuit, grabbed my board, and headed down that narrow, steep trail. Later, around 9:42 p.m. on Highway 314 near the FM tower west of Hollis, everything changed. The man showed up with a paper liability release form for something called vehicle malfunction. The header was all caps, followed by legal text about no damage and no formal complaints. My name was already printed at the bottom. I couldn't speak. I hadn't told anyone about what happened, hadn't even searched online about it. Yet there he was, smiling monumental. Yet there he was, that emotionless smile, holding out the paper. When he asked about repairs and the vehicle's functionality, I just nodded, but wouldn't take the form. After a few seconds, he tucked it back in his coat, acted like we'd finished talking, and left in his car. No recognizable license plate. Nothing's been wrong with the car since then. The lights work, it starts fine, and the radio's normal. I still drive that route for work, and I've never seen the tower blink strangely or that shape again. But I steer clear of any detours now. The night was clear when I pulled up to my usual surf spot. I could see everything in the sky, Orion, the Pleiades, all of it. Just another early morning run in my old silver 06 Dodge van. It's nothing fancy. Sand-filled carpet, broken sliding door I never bother locking. Perfect for dawn patrol surfing. The beach path is tricky, winding down through rock and seaweed. But I didn't even make it halfway to my usual rest spot. Right past the scrub line, I noticed something wrong. The stars had vanished from a huge chunk of sky, from about 30 degrees above the water, straight up. Not like fog or marine layer. This was different. The empty space wasn't exactly dark, more like someone had carved out part of the night sky. I crouched by this scraggly pine tree, surfboard against my knees, trying to make sense of it. Maybe there was a fire somewhere? But then I noticed the silence. No gulls, no waves on rocks, no wind in the grass. Just this odd pressure in my ears, like a quick plane descent. The ocean had gone weird too, flat as glass, no swells. In 3 years of surfing here, I'd never seen anything like it. Even during red tides, something felt wrong. Not that I saw or heard anything coming closer, but there was this heavy feeling in my chest screaming at me to leave. I grabbed my board and scrambled back up to where I'd parked. Everything looked normal when I reached the van. I thought I'd just grab my phone, maybe call my friend Darren down at Salmon Creek, see if he'd noticed anything strange. I pulled open the driver's door and got in. That's when I saw him in the back seat, completely still, facing forward. Black suit, black shirt, no tie, skin white as paper, no hair, nothing on his face, no glasses, no jewelry. His hands were flat on his knees. I couldn't tell his age. He looked neither young nor old, just blank. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at his reflection in the rear view. I was taking the night drive from Carson City back to Bishop, California. The long route down US 395 south was my preference, easier on the car than the hills, and I enjoy nighttime driving. The road stretched empty between dark hills and desert brush that Tuesday night in March. About 11:45 p.m., it was a cold, clear night without a moon. Around 20 miles north of Bridgeport, my headlights cut through the darkness of an otherwise empty highway. Looking in my mirror, I saw him, and my heart nearly stopped. My breath came in sharp gasps as I tried to make sense of it. The van should have been empty. I'd been alone walking down the path earlier. Maybe I'd left it unlocked. That explanation fell apart quickly. He simply hadn't been there before. "Does the ocean ever show you things?" he asked in an eerily empty voice, not mechanical, but devoid of any real presence. I couldn't speak, couldn't move my mouth to form words. He turned his head slightly, not fully facing me, but enough to make it clear he was watching. "You're here often," he continued. "You stay long enough, it shows you more." Finally, I forced out a weak "what?" He fell silent, facing forward again. I stayed frozen, keys clutched in my hand, surfboard jammed against the passenger seat, legs rigid with fear. When I turned to look at him directly, he vanished. No sound, no movement. The seat was simply empty. I burst out of the van, searching underneath and around it. There were no signs anyone had been there. The gravel was undisturbed, the surrounding grass untouched. For about 15 minutes, I sat on the hood, trying to calm down. I wasn't drunk, tired, or on anything. I hadn't hit my head. Everything had felt completely real. After checking the rearview mirror one last time, seeing only my old towel and fin bag, I drove home in silence. I avoided the beach for 2 weeks. When I finally returned, things looked mostly normal. The water was choppy, birds were around, but something was off. The trail had a faint copper smell, and the waves seemed to break further out than before, about 10 feet further. I haven't been back to surf there since June. I was driving when I noticed something unusual in the western sky, a soft yellowish glow hovering above the ridgeline. It was roughly the size of a bus from where I sat, moving sideways with a gentle pulse rather than staying completely still. The light wasn't flickering or moving quickly. It just floated there until it gradually sank behind the hill and vanished without any drama, no noise, no beam of light, nothing. I eased onto the shoulder, wondering if I should investigate. Could have been a small aircraft or weather balloon crash, but there hadn't been any sound of impact. While I sat there with the engine idling, trying to decide what to do, headlights appeared in my mirror. They started as distant bouncing points, but rapidly approached. It was a plain black SUV with heavy tint, not lifted or flashy, just government plates that didn't match California or Nevada formats. It stopped about 15 feet behind me on the shoulder. The headlights went dark, but the engine kept running, quieter than you'd expect for its size. I thought maybe it was Highway Patrol or BLM checking on me, but no one came to my window. 10 minutes passed. I cracked my window slightly, letting in cold air. Through my side mirror, I tried to see inside the SUV, but the tint and angle only showed a dark shape where the driver should be. The vehicle then slowly pulled alongside my car, perfectly aligned with my window. I turned, expecting some signal or their window to roll down, but nothing happened. We sat there for about 20 seconds before they drove away, not rushing, just smooth and steady until their taillights disappeared into the darkness. After waiting another minute, I put my car in gear. The strange light had felt odd, but that SUV felt even stranger. I was more puzzled than frightened by the whole thing. I worked at a small regional airport in northern Idaho as an air traffic controller. 5 years there, mostly handling private planes and some cargo flights. It was a quiet place. Just a handful of flights each day in an old, barely updated tower. I got home late one night, around 1:30 a.m., My place is a simple two-bedroom rental outside town with a fenced yard and cracked driveway backing up to a dry creek bed. After parking, I sat in my car for a moment before going inside. The night felt normal enough. Turned on the kitchen light, fed the cat, then settled on the couch with a glass of water. I scrolled through my phone for maybe 20 minutes, though I wasn't really looking for anything specific. Then came the knocks, 3 quick taps on glass. Not the doorbell, just knuckles. I froze, wondering if I'd imagined it, but they came again with the same rhythm. When I checked the front window, there was no car in the driveway, no movement on the street. I turned on the porch light and opened the door. Nobody was there, but I found a black envelope taped at eye level on the glass. Matte finish, square corners, no markings. After staring at it for a while, I pulled it off. Inside was a single card made of heavy stock, like expensive wedding invitations. It had just one line of printed text. Not everything drifts down. The street was silent, and the porch light seemed dimmer than usual. I stayed awake all night but didn't call anyone. What would I say? The next day, I checked my front camera. It's motion activated and sends clips to my phone, but there was nothing between 8:17 p.m. and sunrise. I kept the envelope. It's in my bedside drawer. Never showed it to anyone or threw it out. These days I avoid that route unless I absolutely have to. Most nights, I work solo shifts as a controller. The solitude never bothers me. It actually helps me concentrate on the screens and radio chatter. But this one night in early October changed everything. Around 9:30 p.m., the radar showed something that shouldn't have been there. It was a crystal clear fall evening, moonlit with no clouds. Way up above normal flight paths, this massive dot just sat there, hovering over the western mountain range. I did everything by the book, reset the radar, checked the power, and rebooted the system. That dot stayed put. Nothing made sense. The flight schedule was empty. The transponder list showed nothing. The FAA regional office had no answers, no military exercises, no helicopters, no drones. This thing was huge compared to regular aircraft blips, but it wasn't moving or sending any signals. I logged it as an unidentified stationary radar contact and sent it up the chain, figuring someone above me would investigate. The power blipped once around 11 p.m., but our systems kept running. Before midnight, the contact disappeared. I wrote it off as system interference and finished my shift. When I talked to my supervisor the next day, something felt off. She seemed distracted, almost irritated, and insisted the radar data showed nothing unusual. Things got stranger that afternoon. Someone claiming to be from a federal aviation agency called about a routine check. At 7 p.m., 3 men arrived. They looked nearly identical. Black coats, plain button-up shirts, graying hair, probably in their late 40s or early 50s. Their attempt at friendliness felt rehearsed. The badges they showed looked official but weren't from any agency I knew. Late one night at the control tower, I spotted something bizarre on the radar, a massive, stationary contact that shouldn't have been there. The next morning, 2 men showed up, flashing official-looking badges. They wouldn't say clearly who they worked for, just mumbled something about aviation oversight. I handed over everything I had, radar recordings, screenshots, my written notes. They barely spoke while reviewing it all, just whispered to each other. One of them made this weird comment about my imaginative writing style. He was polite enough, but something felt threatening beneath the surface. They asked to work on the radar equipment for a bit, so I stepped out for a drink. When I returned, they'd vanished without a trace. The tower logbook containing all my records, including the strange radar incident, was gone too. The door was locked from inside, meaning they'd left through the main entrance. My calls to the FAA and supervisor got me nowhere. Nobody had authorized their visit or the removal of the logs. Conveniently, the security cameras were down that evening for maintenance. The radar system showed no sign of the contact I'd seen, and my supervisor dismissed it as my mistake. I searched the tower thoroughly after that. All I found was an odd burnt smell near the radar console. Those men, their mysterious badges, that comment about my imagination, were they government agents? Something else? I stuck around after hours for a while, hoping they'd return, but they never did. I ended up leaving that job, but the experience still haunts me. It feels like someone deliberately erased what happened that night. In quiet moments, I can't help thinking about that strange radar blip and the men who seemed so intent on making it disappear. At the National Weather Service, we see all kinds of strange weather patterns, but what happened that night at the Sreto Mountain Station was different. I'm Jordan Mills, and after 5 years of remote monitoring and radar operations, I thought I'd seen it all. But I was wrong. The station sits in a seriously isolated spot about 10 miles east of the mountain range. When something unusual happens out there, you're completely alone with it. The nearest town is over an hour away. That late April night started like any other, with me running routine Doppler radar scans for precipitation and wind patterns around 10 p.m. earlier that evening. Something caught my eye on the screen, a massive stationary mass hovering over the northern Sangra Dito range. My first thought was a technical glitch, but no amount of frequency adjustments or radar recalibration made it disappear. This wasn't any weather pattern I recognized. The shape stayed sharp-edged and well-defined, spanning at least 5 miles across, too large for aircraft or birds, yet it wasn't showing up on any satellite imagery. Things got stranger around midnight when the old landline rang. Most late calls came from dispatch or maintenance, but this was different. A man's voice, low and calm, said they needed to visit the station about the equipment. Before I could get his name, the line went dead. No caller ID, nothing to trace. The situation took an even more unsettling turn at 1:30 a.m. when someone knocked on the front door. Through the security cameras, I saw two tall men in their mid-40s wearing spotless black coats, oddly pristine for our remote location. Their hair was perfectly styled, which made no sense for that hour in such an isolated place. I still can't explain what I saw that night or who those men were, but I know it wasn't my imagination. They appeared at my door late that night, two figures in dark suits, their hair slicked back and faces impossible to read. They claimed they were there to calibrate the radar, flashing some kind of official-looking badge with an embossed seal I didn't recognize. Despite my protests about not being authorized to let anyone in, especially at that hour, I relented. In the middle of nowhere, what else could I do? The pair worked in complete silence, except for the equipment's soft hum. Their actions didn't match any calibration procedure I knew. Typing strange sequences, adjusting frequencies, rerouting data. After 20 minutes, they packed up and left with just a nod, no words exchanged. The changes became obvious immediately. The massive stationary shape that had been on the radar was gone. The station felt different too, stale air, flickering screens. When I checked the system logs, 8 hours of data had vanished without a trace. The backup drives were empty, and dispatch had no record of our station's radar activity during that time. My supervisor's response the next morning made everything stranger. He said no one had authorized any visitors, and the security feeds showed nothing. When I insisted I'd seen them with my own eyes, he just told me to write it up and forget about it. I tried talking to locals at the diner in town, but no one had noticed anything unusual in the sky around the mountains. The radar kept working normally after that, but those missing hours never showed up in the logs. I still watch the skies over the Sangre Cristo range some nights, but that mysterious shape, Neve, appeared again. The Adirondacks in early September are usually crowded, but I'd carefully planned my trip for right after Labor Day weekend. Living about 3 hours south near Pakipi, I knew the perfect time to escape the tourist rush. I'd done these solo hikes before, just me, my gear, and the wilderness. No phone service, no crowds, exactly how I liked it. I pulled into the Indian Lake trailhead around 6:30 that morning. The weather was perfect, low 60s, clear skies, not a hint of wind or fog. There was just one other vehicle there, a white Outback with Vermont plates. I had a simple plan, a 6-hour loop trail, taking breaks whenever I felt like it. The first few hours went exactly as expected. Woodpeckers tapped away in the distance, and deer occasionally crossed my path. I stopped for lunch around 1:30 on a ridge overlooking dense northern forest. Everything changed about 2/3 through the loop. After I'd packed up and continued walking, that's when I saw them. 3 red lights hovering just above the tree line, maybe 100 yards to my left. Each one was roughly dime-sized at arm's length, blinking in some strange rhythm I couldn't make sense of. The forest was dead quiet, no wind, no rustling leaves, just those lights floating there. I grabbed my phone to record them, but the camera struggled to focus through the branches. When I glanced away from my screen and back again, they'd vanished. I waited 5 minutes, hoping they'd return, but saw nothing. The rest of the hike felt different. Though I never saw another soul, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, I'd stop, certain I'd heard footsteps matching mine. I told myself it was just wildlife or my imagination, but I walked faster anyway. By the time I reached the trailhead at 4 o'clock, my nerves were shot. That white Outback was still there, unmoved, its owner nowhere in sight. Now when everything is quiet and the air grows heavy, I sometimes catch that low humming sound as if the station itself is reliving those moments. I was driving south while the sun was still up, expecting to reach home before nightfall. Everything seemed normal until I hit Shrew Lake. That's when I first spotted it. A black car with deeply tinted windows trailing behind me. Couldn't tell if it was a Dodge or Lincoln, but what caught my eye was the missing license plates. For half an hour, this car matched my every move. Speed up, slowed. I switched lanes, took 2 different exits, even made an unplanned turnoff near Ticonderoga. The black car followed every time. By then, my nerves were getting raw. The sky was darkening when I pulled into a basic rest stop, just a picnic table and trash can kind of place. I cut my engine and waited. The black car parked a few spaces away, silent and still. 10 minutes passed with no movement. When I finally pulled back onto I-87, they were right there behind me again. Another hour went by. Near Kinderhook, my gas gauge was running low, so I stopped at a Seneca station off Route 9. It was completely dark by then. While I filled up, the black car waited at the far end of the lot. I went inside to pay, keeping watch through the windows. When I came back out, everything changed. They'd parked right next to me, driver's window down. The man inside looked ordinary enough. Clean-shaven, 40-something, wearing a black cap and hoodie. Without any greeting, he held out a USB stick and said, "Replace your footage with this." When I didn't respond, he repeated it louder, his expression completely blank. I took it, though I'm not sure why. He left immediately after that, and I didn't see the car again for the rest of my drive home. I spent that whole night awake, trying to make sense of what had happened Balsam. The USB stick sitting untouched on my desk. The whole thing started as a simple weekend getaway at Greg's uncle's hunting cabin in northern Minnesota. Nothing fancy, just a basic shelter with a wood stove and a massive stack of firewood tucked between a frozen lake and some unplowed logging roads. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, and not a neighbor in sight. That's exactly what we were after. We arrived Friday evening when it was already dark. The February air was biting cold, around 12 deg, but the stars were brilliant in the clear sky. Our plans were simple. 2 nights of peace, some hiking, maybe ice fishing if we could find the gear. We'd packed all the essentials: food, beer, and snowshoes. Saturday morning was lazy. We took our time with coffee and eggs before heading out around 11 o'clock. There was this narrow trail going east from the property, winding through dense birch and pine trees, passing an old collapsed shed before climbing up a ridge. Greg mentioned there used to be a fire tower at the top, though he hadn't been there in about 10 years. We kept it light, just a thermos and some granola bars, and strapped on our snowshoes. The snow was deep but packed enough that we weren't sinking too badly. The climb took about 2 hours, nothing too steep, just a steady incline. We didn't chat much on the way. The next morning, I plugged a USB drive into an old laptop I hadn't touched in years. It was completely empty, except for one file, v.mep4. The 10-minute video was nothing but a grey screen with faint crackling and occasional high-pitched tones, like an old CRT TV starting up. I watched the whole thing expecting something to happen, but nothing did. I never shared my footage from the hike, and when I tried to check it later, it wouldn't load, just showed up as corrupted. Nothing worked, not copying, renaming, or using print software. The thumbnail was due, Sense Black. Last fall, I drove back to Indian Lake, just to check if that white Outback was still there. It wasn't. But in the same spot sat another black car, different model but also without plates. I didn't stop, just kept driving. Haven't been back since. The old fire tower still stood at the summit, about 40 feet tall with its frame surprisingly intact, despite the half-rotted wooden steps and rust. A faded no trespassing sign barely clung to one of the supports. We'd noticed how unusually quiet it was during our hike up, just our footsteps breaking the silence, not even the trees creaking. Standing there catching our breath, we watched a few crows fly overhead. It was only 3:30, but the sun sat low, casting everything in that bluish winter glow. That's when Greg tapped my arm and pointed west, past the tree line beyond the tower. There, floating 30 or 40 feet up, hovered a soft white orb about the size of a basketball. It wasn't a plane or a drone, just this perfectly still light that didn't blink or move. We stood speechless at first. I wondered if it was sunlight reflecting off ice in the trees, but it was too high and distant for that. "That's not right," Greg whispered. The silence felt heavy up there. No wind, no birds, nothing. When I tried taking a picture, my phone had no signal and the screen went weird, showing flickering bands of static I'd never seen before. Looking up from my phone, I saw the orb had shifted slightly higher and to the right, still moving silently and smoothly. After about a minute, it simply vanished, didn't fly away, just disappeared. Greg swore quietly and suggested we leave. We hurried down without talking, trying not to show how unsettled we were. The woods felt wrong, like something was pacing us just out of sight. By the time we reached the cabin at dusk, we went straight for the whiskey and sat in silence without Boo. Still on, only after a few drinks did we discuss what we'd seen, debating whether it was a drone, a flare, or some weather phenomenon. But none of those explanations felt right. I was coming off second shift at a packaging plant near Greensburg, Indiana, just off I-74. The time was around 12:40 in the morning when everything went sideways. The movement caught my eye first. Too smooth, too controlled. Unlike a fire's natural flicker, this light made no sound and moved with an unnatural grace. Sleep was almost impossible that night. I'd catch myself drifting off, only to snap awake at what sounded like footsteps in the snow. Each time I sat up and listened, silence was the only reply. Greg was restless too, tossing and turning beside me, so I let him be. Morning came, and we needed to clear our heads. There's a small store half an hour away, the kind that sells everything from jerky to propane to local handicrafts. We spent some time there, buying snacks and filling the gas tank, trying to keep the conversation normal. But what happened when we got back changed everything. The truck was right where we'd left it, but we weren't alone. A man in a black suit and coat sat in the passenger seat, looking like he'd been expecting us. He seemed out of place, clean-shaven, pale, maybe in his 50s, more suited for a downtown office than the middle of nowhere. We stopped dead in our tracks, watching as he stepped out with an unsettling smile. Not exactly fake, but like someone who'd learned about smiling from a manual. "That wasn't meant for you," he said softly, his voice somehow reaching us clearly despite the distance. Greg asked who he was, but the man just kept smiling. Then he walked straight into the woods, wearing no winter gear, as if the cold meant nothing to him. We waited half a minute before checking the truck. Nothing was stolen or moved, but the inner part of their desolate floor was mysteriously warm, as if someone had been running the heat even though Greg had the keys the whole time. We stayed one final night, barely talking, doors locked and blinds drawn. I slept in my boots. At first light, we left and haven't returned since. Greg's uncle still says we can visit any time, but we always find reasons not to. I've kept quiet about it. Who'd believe a story about a floating light and a suited man vanishing into snowy woods? To this day, I can't explain how he got into that truck. The night I saw it, I was about 15 minutes from home on CR 700E. The radio caught my attention first, cutting out every few seconds, not with static, but complete silence before popping back mid-sentence. When I switched stations, they all did the same thing. Then my headlights dimmed to half strength for a moment. That's when I spotted it hovering over a cut field about a quarter mile ahead on the left. The old half-collapsed barn with its rusted roof was there too, a familiar sight I'd passed countless times, but this was different. Something massive hung in the air, maybe 50 feet up, completely motionless at first. It took me a moment to make out its shape in the darkness. A huge triangle, like a flat wedge with rounded corners, stretched nearly across the entire field. It had no lights except for 3 small, dull red dots on its underside, one at each point. They weren't glowing or blinking, just existing like standby lights on electronics. The roads were empty that night, which wasn't unusual. This stretch never had much traffic after dark. No street lights either, just endless corn and soy fields broken up by the occasional mailbox marking a gravel driveway. I pulled over onto the shoulder and rolled down my window. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, not even my car's engine made a sound. The air felt completely still. The object yard rifted slightly like it was floating on air, not wobbling, but moving with an eerily smooth, deliberate motion unlike anything I'd seen before. I sat watching for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Despite being alone on that dark road, I wasn't scared, just intensely aware of my solitude. It never occurred to me to take out my phone. Finally, the triangle began rising, maintaining its perfectly level position as it lifted straight up until it disappeared from view. The garbage truck woke my dog around 7:30 that morning. I was off work, so I went through my usual routine, feeding her, making coffee. That's when I spotted the black sedan in my driveway. 2 men in dark suits stood outside it. The car had tinted windows, no plates, and looked government-issued. One man waited by the car while the other stood near my front step. When I cracked open the door, the closer man offered a small, polite smile. Just a few quick questions, ma'am, if you have a minute. I stepped onto the porch and he asked about my drive on County Road 700E the night before, near the collapsed barn. After I confirmed I'd been there, he wanted to know if I'd seen anything unusual. I hesitated. The man watched my face carefully, not threatening, just observant. Finally, I mentioned the weird lights in the sky. That's when the man by the car spoke up. Do you often imagine things at night? His tone was genuinely curious, like this wasn't the first time he'd asked that question. I firmly told them I was wide awake and certain about what I'd seen. It had happened the night before. Around 2 a.m. the lights had just faded upward until they disappeared. No flash, no change in those red dots. After waiting another minute, I'd driven the rest of the way to my house in the new subdivision outside Westport. I hadn't told anyone when I got home, just heated up some leftover mac and cheese, showered, and went to bed. Sleep hadn't come easily, not from fear, but from feeling too wired to settle down. Back on the porch, the closer man simply nodded at my answer. He asked about outdoor cameras, and when I said I had none, he thanked me and left. Both men got in their car and drove away, not stopping at any other houses in the cul-de-sac, just heading straight out to the main road. Around 4:20 p.m., I was out near Highway 95 with my DJI Mavic 3 Pro drone. The spot was perfect. A gravel pull-off where people often watch the sky, surrounded by flat desert and distant mountains. I'd set up in my truck bed, ready for an evening of filming. With my cooler, headphones, and a book, I planned to catch the sunset for a time-lapse project. The first half hour went smoothly. The late afternoon light was giving me beautiful shots of the desert. I was careful to stay clear of the Yuma Proving Grounds restricted zone. I'm a hobbyist, not a troublemaker. But then, while moving the camera northward, something strange flashed across my screen. It was incredibly fast. Just a metallic blur. When I reviewed the footage frame by frame, whatever it was crossed the entire frame in about 1/10 of a second. It wasn't like any bird I'd ever seen. No wings, no natural movement, just this chrome-like flash moving in an unnaturally straight line. I pointed the camera in that direction and waited. Seconds later I saw it again. A dark, thin shape moving silently and impossibly low and fast. Things got stranger after that day. I noticed a grey, greasy smear across my mailbox in our block's group box, just mine, none of the others. When I wiped it off with a paper towel, it left an oily streak. That night, my dog refused to go into the backyard. She just whined at the door and backed away when I opened it. I had to walk her out front, where she kept staring up at the sky, unusually quiet. It's bed and weeks now, but I'm still unsettled. I've started taking different routes home from work every night. I threw away that paper towel from the mailbox, though sometimes I wish I'd kept it. A strange shape kept appearing in the desert sky, about 10 or 15 feet long with no wings, lights, or contrail. It didn't seem manned or even manufactured. The object would suddenly appear, fly straight across my view at different angles, then completely vanish. Not fade away or shrink with distance, just disappear. I tried getting my drone higher for a better look, but immediately lost signal. The video feed went haywire and died. My controller showed no connection even though I could still see the drone. When I hit return to home, nothing happened. Then the controller itself shut down, despite having 74% battery left. Looking up, my drone had vanished without a sound. Standing on my truck's tailgate, I searched the horizon but saw nothing. An eerie feeling washed over me, like something was watching. I stayed there a while, expecting headlights or sounds that never came. The desert remained silent until sunset. By 8:45, I was home in my small fenced house on the edge of Yuma. I sat in my driveway with the engine running, unable to shake that weird silence and the feeling that whatever had been watching had only temporarily looked away. Around 10:30, 3 slow knocks came at my door. With my porch light broken, I grabbed a flashlight and checked the peephole. Seeing only darkness, I opened the door slightly. There stood a man in a black suit and tie, white shirt, his hair slicked back. His shoes were spotless despite my gravel walkway. His age was impossible to pin down, anywhere from 35 to 55. His smile never reached his eyes. "You misunderstood the sky," he said flatly. "Let's keep it that way." That was all. He didn't introduce himself or make any requests. He just stood there, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement, while I remained frozen at the door. I got to Ridge Hollow Campground late that October evening. Most leaves had already fallen and the nights dipped into the low 40s. I was ready for the cold, though, Had all the right gear for a 3-night solo camping trip near the Allegheny front. I'd been there before with friends, but this time I wanted total solitude. No phone, no emails, just trees and silence. The campground was deserted. Site 12 had a gravel parking lot, and I lugged my pack a few hundred yards to set up camp before dark. No other cars around, no distant campfires, just wind whistling through bare trees and occasional owl calls. That first night was simple, made some ramen on my camp stove, read by headlamp, and went to bed around 10. I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to pee, tried to hold it, not wanting to leave my cold tent, but finally had to give in. The fire had died down to just a few glowing coals. I slipped on my boots, walked a few yards away to relieve myself, then crawled back into my tent. Everything felt normal then. Just quiet. Later, at home, a man in a suit showed up at my door, standing there without even ringing the doorbell. He didn't blink once. When he left, walking down my porch steps out of the light, I never heard a car start or saw any tail lights. Just silence. I stayed up most of that night, keeping the living room lights on and checking the street every 10 minutes through open curtains. Next morning, my drone was missing from its locked hard case in the truck bed. The case was still there under the tunnel cover, properly zipped, no forced entry, but inside was just empty molded foam. No drone, no controller. I searched everywhere. Truck interior, garage, even my office, though I knew I'd locked it in the case. My Ring doorbell footage was no help. It froze at 3:12 a.m. and didn't resume until 3:45. That had never happened before. I thought about reporting it, but who'd believe me? That my drone vanished after seeing something strange in the desert, followed by a mysterious man telling me to forget it. I knew what I saw was real, but I stopped flying for quite a while after that. When I unzipped the tent that morning at 6:12 a.m., the first thing I noticed was the fire pit. The stones around it had been rearranged into a perfect circle. Not just roughly circular, but geometrically precise, with even spacing you'd need proper tools to achieve. I stood there for a full minute, trying to convince myself I'd done it and forgotten, but that wasn't possible. I'd never touched those rocks. I used a folding stove inside the ring. I grabbed my phone out of habit, even though there was no signal up there. Without really thinking about it, I snapped one photo of the circle, and I just made my coffee and sat in my camp chair, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. Later that day, around noon, I headed out on the Red Blaze Trail. It was a familiar route, about 5 miles round trip, leading past some rock outcrops to a ridge with a nice view. Nothing strenuous. About half an hour in, that's when I saw him. He wasn't walking or moving, just standing there off the trail like he'd been waiting. He wore a spotless black uniform, the kind security guards wear, looking freshly pressed. He stepped onto the trail with slow, measured movements. "You camping alone?" he asked in a flat, emotionless voice. When I confirmed I was at Site 12, he made an odd request. "Mind if I see your camera?" I hesitated. My Canon point-and-shoot was in my pack. I hadn't used it since arriving and hadn't told anyone I'd brought it, not even in the ranger station logbook. When I asked why, he just tilted his head and repeated his request. For some sour reason, I found myself handing it over. He barely looked at it, just turned it over once in his palm before giving it back. "Please don't." Late that Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at my cousin's fishing cabin near Lake Vermilion in Minnesota. It wasn't much, just a one-room shack with a wood stove and a small dock. No Wi-Fi or cell service, which was exactly what I wanted. The weather was starting to cool off, typical for mid-September. I took the old aluminum boat out that evening, bringing some tackle and a six-pack. Just slow trolling for walleye. Caught a couple small ones and released them back. As darkness fell, the lake went completely still. I cut the trolling motor and drifted, listening to water tap against the hull. Around 10:30, I spotted a glow hovering over the middle of the lake. At first, I thought it was another boat, maybe someone with a lantern or LED lights. But this was different. A round, pulsing white light floating about 40-50 feet above the water. No beam, no flicker, no sound. Just this slow rhythm of dimming and brightening. I switched off my vest headlamp and watched. The light stayed fixed in place, neither approaching nor retreating. I kept checking my watch, starting at 10:41 because time felt strange. A man appeared on the trail. "Take pictures of the fire rings," he said flatly, then stepped off the path and vanished into the trees. Not running or walking, just disappeared down the slope. I stood there holding the camera, confused. I wanted to turn back, but something kept me from walking past that spot again. I finished the hike without taking any more photos. That evening at camp, I checked the picture I'd taken. The circle showed clearly at first, but an hour later the file was corrupted, just a black thumbnail. All other photos were fine. Sleep came fitfully that night. Nothing happened. No strange noises, no vizier, tours, but I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps outside my tent. In the morning, I found the rocks had been moved again, scattered in a weird arc curving away from the pit like a tail, not kicked or tossed, deliberately placed. I left them as they were. I haven't gone camping alone since. The fog had rolled in thick by 7 a.m. when I was on the dock with my coffee. Couldn't see past the first tree line. It was a stark contrast to the night before, when everything changed in an instant, that white light suddenly turning pale orange, like someone had flipped a switch. I'd been frozen in place, watching it for maybe 10 minutes. No sound, just silence. My phone was in the cabin charging, so I couldn't record it. Then it vanished. Not flying away, just there one moment and gone the next. I stayed on the water another half hour, trying to rationalize it as a drone or some trick of light. But there were no navigation lights, no noise, nothing you'd expect from something flying that low. Around 8, I heard tires popping over rocks before I saw the black SUV pull down the gravel path. It stopped near the cabin, and 2 men in black suits without ties stepped out, one tall and thin, the other broader and older, maybe in his 50s. Without introducing themselves, the older one asked about unusual experiences on the lake last night. When I deflected with "like what?" he mentioned lights, shapes, electrical problems. His smile wasn't friendly. He questioned me about my depth finder, and I told him it was just a basic old sonar unit. The tall one never spoke, just walked the dock looking at the water, holding an unused notepad. When asked about phone or radio interference, I mentioned having no service. The older man nodded knowingly, then advised, "Real calm. Might be a good idea to fish elsewhere for a while." He sounded tired, like he was passing on received wisdom. The night before, I'd gone back to the cabin and locked the door, something I rarely did out there, and laid down with my boots still on, managing maybe 3 hours of sleep. After the men left in their unmarked SUV, I tried checking the depth finder's log, though I wasn't even sure how. My name is Paul Donovan, I'm 32, and what I'm about to tell you happened last fall during a work trip in northern Arizona. I need to be clear. This happened exactly as I'll describe it, even though I'm still trying to understand it myself. I left Flagstaff around 8 p.m. after a client meeting, planning to stay overnight in a motel near Winslow before heading home the next day. The drive should have taken about 2 hours. The night was clear but cold, with a sky full of stars. I took Route 66 for a while before switching to a smaller highway that cut through desert and patches of forest. I was tired, but not sleepy. Just that peaceful kind of tired you feel after a long day's work. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car at 5:47 a.m., parked on the shoulder of some unmarked dirt road. No streetlights, no signs, just scrub brush and low hills surrounded me. My phone had no signal. The last thing I could remember was stopping for gas near Flagstaff around 10:30 p.m. There was nothing between then and waking up. No fuzzy memories of driving, no towns, no traffic, nothing. The car was perfectly fine. No dents or scratches anywhere. I sat there in the cold, dry air, completely alone, trying to make sense of it. The gas tank was still half full, though I couldn't remember filling it after Flagstaff. I noticed my sonar had been running even though I hadn't turned it on. It has a small SD card in the back that stores history, but when I checked, the card was just gone. Not removed, just gone. The slot was empty, but still locked shut. An ascend. One, you can't take the card out without unlocking it first. I hadn't even looked at that device in months. I didn't feel exactly scared, but something felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Even though I'd planned to stay through the weekend, I packed up and drove straight back to Duff. I haven't returned to that lake since. The whole thing started when I found myself on a desert back road, my car suddenly out of gas. The air was thick with sage, and the cold earth stretched out in every direction. I needed to find civilization before anyone spotted my abandoned vehicle, so I grabbed my jacket and started walking. The silence was total, broken only by a slight breeze. After about a mile, I hit pavement and followed it east. The Desert Pines Lodge Motel sign appeared, and that's when I realized something strange. I was near Winslow, but completely opposite from where I should have been. My phone still showed no service as I approached the motel office. Inside, a tired-looking woman sat at the desk, clearly on night shift. She hadn't seen anyone since the previous evening, and there were no messages for me. I took a room, trying to shake off the weird feeling that hours of my life had simply disappeared. I was drifting in and out of sleep around 9 a.m. when someone knocked. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a black suit and long coat, his dark hair perfectly combed. His face was blank, emotionless. "You're back early," he said when I asked who he was. Before I could respond further, he stepped back and vanished. No footsteps, no doors, no cars, just gone. I locked myself in, heart racing, convinced I wasn't dreaming but unable to explain what I'd seen. I spent the rest of the day watching for him to return, but he never did. When I called my office later, they confirmed the client had seen me leave at 8 p.m., but nobody knew where I'd been after the fog. My car was undamaged, nothing was missing, but something wasn't right. Checking my phone's GPS history at home days later revealed a massive gap. From 10:30 p.m. to 5:30 a.m., with an unexplained detour onto those back roads, I kept the story of the man in black to myself. Who would believe me? Let me tell you about something weird that happened in my backyard last September. I'm Clara, just a regular person from northern Vermont who likes taking pictures of stars. Nothing fancy. I've got a decent camera and a cheap tripod, but I'm no professional astronomer or anything. It was a clear night just past 10 p.m. with no moon out. The weather still had that late summer feel, even though fall was creeping in. I was doing my usual thing, snapping photos of the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, the classics. I'd found a good spot where the trees thin out at the edge of my property, giving me a nice wide view of the sky. That's when things got strange. After about an hour of photography, I spotted this odd star in the eastern sky. It wasn't behaving like any star I'd ever seen. It had this weird blinking pattern, on-off-off, pause, on-off, pause. Totally different from the steady twinkle of normal stars or the way planes and satellites move. This light just sat there, perfectly still, keeping that same rhythm for at least 15 minutes straight. What happened next really freaked me out. The light started moving downward, not like a shooting star or anything fast, but slowly, like something deliberately lowering itself behind the trees. As it got closer to the tree line, the blinking light looked bigger and bigger until it finally disappeared from view. I stuck around for another half hour hoping it might come back, but no luck. When I told my friend Maggie about it the next day, she brushed it off, suggested maybe I'd seen a plane's lights or a satellite. I know what I saw was different. I kept watching the sky every night for the next week, same time hoping to spot it again, but it never showed up. I still don't have answers about what happened that night, or about the man in black, or those missing hours when I found myself on unfamiliar roads. Even though my mechanic checked my car and said everything was fine, brakes, steering, engine, all working perfectly, I can't shake this feeling. These days, whenever I'm driving late, especially on quiet back roads, I can't help glancing over my shoulder just to be sure. The library was my refuge 6 days after that strange night, a quiet, small place where dust seemed to float in slow motion. I had settled into the reading nook with astronomy books when everything changed. A man materialized in the seat across from me, wearing simple black clothes and looking completely ordinary except for his intense expression. He was maybe in his late 30s, clean-cut, nothing remarkable except how he appeared without a sound. His question caught me off guard. "Are you still watching the sky?" I could only nod, thrown by his directness. His smile wasn't friendly, more like checking off a box on a list. "You should be careful what you look for," he said. "Some things aren't meant to be found." Before I could ask anything, he stood up, dropped a card on the table, and vanished as quietly as he'd arrived. The card just said, E-Cross with a phone number, no other details. I kept it but never called. That night, I returned to my backyard spot, hoping to see the blinking star again. The sky stayed stubbornly normal, just regular stars, no movement, total silence, but then weird things began happening. My phone started losing signal in places it never had before. My camera's battery would mysteriously drain, and there was this constant feeling of being watched. Not in a scary way, just this steady sensation of hidden eyes. The incident with the car really shook me. I was walking home from the grocery store when this vehicle with dark tinted windows and no license plate drove past me twice. The second time, I caught the driver staring right at me. I hurried home, trying not to look back. When I told Maggie about everything, the car, the library man, the star, she said I should go to the police. But what would I even tell them? It all sounded ridiculous, even to me. That summer afternoon in La Mesa, Texas started like any other assignment. I'm Sarah Donovan, and as a journalist covering rural mysteries and local oddities, I was used to stories that most people dismiss with a laugh. The farmer's call about strange crop damage seemed routine enough, probably pests or weather, I thought. The air was thick with the scent of dry grass and dust as I pulled my beat-up pickup to the edge of the cornfield. Something was definitely off about that 50-foot-wide patch of flattened stalks. The corn was bent in unusual directions, nothing like typical storm damage. It looked intentional, as if someone had carefully pushed down each plant. Jim, the farmer, kept his distance, only mumbling, "It's not normal," when I tried to get his take. I spent hours taking photos and making notes. The ground beneath the damaged crops was hard and cracked, and there was this odd metallic smell I couldn't quite place. Later that night at my motel, while reviewing my work, my phone rang. The next part still gives me chills. The guy on the phone, wearing a black jacket, rambled about strange things, while a blinking light moved behind the trees. I left my back door cracked open that night, unusual for me, but it was warm. While editing photos, I heard it, a smooth, quiet humming, like a distant engine. It lasted maybe 20 seconds before fading away. When I checked OT, outside, the sky was empty. The next morning, my camera was gone from the kitchen table. The back door was shut, the lock undamaged. I never saw that camera again. After that night, I avoided going outside after dark and tried to forget the whole thing. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear that humming sound again, and I can't help thinking about the blinking light, its slow descent, and that strange man at the library. The calls started coming in with an odd pattern, just static, faint clicking, and what sounded like steady breathing on the line. It wasn't aggressive breathing, just a quiet, consistent presence alongside those clicks. I'd listen for a couple minutes each time, but nothing more would happen. Calling back always led straight to voicemail. At first, I brushed it off as someone playing pranks because of my investigation, but something about that breathing lingered in my thoughts. When I mentioned it to Jim the next day, his response was unsettling. "You're not the only one. Some of us been getting those calls lately. No one talks, just that note. Folks say it's nothing, but it sure feels like something." I headed back to town that afternoon, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Nothing showed up in my rearview mirror, yet that subtle pressure stayed with me, like a weight on my chest. Back at my apartment in La Mesa, as the sun was setting and painting the sky orange, someone knocked on my door. The man who stood there was dressed completely in black, jacket, pants, and a low-pulled cap that shadowed his eyes. He had the look of someone trying to avoid attention. After a long silence, he spoke quietly. Stories can disappear, too. Before I could respond, he walked away. When I checked through the peephole moments later, he'd vanished. No car, no footprints, nothing. The phone calls kept coming after that night. Alwa is with the same silence, clicks, and breathing. I stopped picking up. The crop damage story started falling apart. My notes seemed wrong when I reviewed them. Details changed, and the photos showed shadows and shapes I didn't remember capturing. Nobody else witnessed anything when I talked about the calls and the mysterious visitor. Maybe it was a warning, maybe just coincidence. But something about the whole experience made me step back. The combination of those persistent calls, the vanishing man, and my dissolving investigation pushed me to drop the story entirely. 3 perfect circles of light drifted through our backyard that late summer evening in northern Michigan. They moved silently, glowing with a strange, oily white light, floating about 3 feet above the grass. No source, no sound, just 3 basketball-sized orbs gliding on invisible rails. We've been having a normal family night around the fire pit. Me, my wife Lisa, and our kids, Abby and Max. The air was cool but comfortable, the sky scattered with stars. The yard glowed with firelight and old string lights on the deck. The kids were just being kids, Max showing off his flashlight to Abby, claiming it could cut through anything. Abby spotted them first. She went quiet, pointed toward the woods at the edge of our property, and whispered, "Look." We all saw them. When Lisa asked if we could see it too, I knew it wasn't just in my head. I tried to grab a photo, but my phone went completely dead when I pointed it at the lights, even though it had been working fine moments before. The lights drifted toward the tree line and vanished behind the pines without disturbing a single branch. Max finally broke our stunned silence. What was that? None of us had an answer. I kept checking the yard from the kitchen window that night, but everything went back to owl. The next morning, our neighbor, Mr. Garrison, mentioned something odd, but I still can't make sense of what happened. I just know we all got caught up in something that didn't belong in our world, something that resists being talked about. To this day, I don't understand what those lights were. The morning fog rolled in thick over Lake Crescent in Washington. I was on my cabin's dock just after sunset, breathing in the wet pine and earth smell that followed the light rain. The sky was starting to clear, and I had my phone out to catch the evening light on the water. Lisa first spotted him talking to Mr. Garrison, some guy in all black, like he was trying to blend into the fog. Black jacket, black pants, the whole deal. He spoke quietly with Mr. Prose's Garrison for about 5 minutes before leaving in a dark sedan. When I asked Mr. Garrison about it later, he just blinked and said he hadn't talked to anyone. Things got stranger when Lisa mentioned our locked mailbox had been tampered with. Inside was this black plastic folder, no labels, no writing, completely empty, but it was oddly warm, like it had been in the sun all day, even though it was a cool morning. We put it on the kitchen table, and hours later, it still hadn't cooled down. That night felt different. The kids couldn't settle, and Lisa kept checking the windows for those lights we'd seen before. The next few days brought this constant feeling of being watched. You know that sensation when you just know someone's there, but you can't see them? I started hearing these faint humming sounds, sometimes outside the window, sometimes in the walls, just quiet enough to make you doubt yourself. Then the folder vanished without a trace. The neighbors hadn't seen anything unusual, and Mr. said, Garrison wouldn't even look at me anymore, his eyes darting away whenever I tried to catch his gaze. Though the lights never came back, that unsettling feeling stuck around. We tried to get back to normal, but sometimes when I'm alone outside, I see things at the edge of the yard. White flashes, shapes moving between trees, and I can't help wondering if we're still being watched. I was filming some nature scenes by the lake. Nothing fancy, just peaceful clips for my own enjoyment. The lake was quiet that night, broken only by fish splashing and trees rustling in the breeze. The first strange thing I noticed were these unusual lights over the far shore near the hills. They weren't like normal stars. These were soft blue and white pinpricks that moved slowly through the air without any clear pattern. They were dim but distinct. I tried zooming in with my phone to get a better view. One light disappeared briefly, then showed up again closer to the shore and higher up, moving silently through the night. While I was watching the lights, I spotted something that made me freeze. A figure stood at the dock's edge, completely motionless. They were dressed in pure black. Not just dark clothes, but something that seemed designed to blend with the darkness. No reflective surfaces, no hat, just black. I hadn't heard them approach. No footsteps. Nothing. When I called out asking if they were okay, they didn't answer. I tried again, louder. The figure turned their head toward me with an unnaturally slow mechanical movement. Then they started sliding sideways along the shore, keeping their gaze fixed on me until they disappeared behind some trees. There was no sound of branches breaking or footsteps. They just vanished. By then, the lights above the far shore were gone too, like they'd never existed. I hurried back to the cabin, double-checking all the locks. My phone had no signal, which was normal for the area, but everything felt wrong, like eyes were watching from the dark forest. The next day, I drove to Port Angeles for coffee. When I returned around noon, there was a black sedan parked near my cabin that hadn't been there the night before. We were heading back to Los Angeles from Vegas, Karen and I, cutting through the Mojave Desert right as day was turning to night. The desert had started cooling down, but the sky still held on to that warm glow, orange melting into purple above us. The drive was peaceful, just soft radio music, endless road, and a vast desert sky stretching out around us. I was driving while Karen searched through radio stations. That's when everything changed. Through my window, I spotted a strange light creeping up over a ridge near the highway. It wasn't like any normal headlight or flare. This thing floated up like a balloon, then just stayed there, hanging above the ridge. The light was perfectly round, glowing, steady and white, not blinking like you'd expect from a plane. Then suddenly it vanished, like someone hit a switch, and at that exact moment, every radio station turned to static. Later, I came across something even stranger at my cabin. The road there's a dead end, barely used during the week, so when I saw that sedan parked outside, spotless, windows heavily tinted, no plates visible, it caught my attention. No one was around, engine off. As I walked up to check it out, something felt wrong. I could have sworn I saw movement behind those dark windows, but when I looked harder, there was nothing. The area was completely empty, no footprints, no other cars. The car sat there all day, I thought about calling the police, but figured they'd dismiss it as just some lost driver. So I stayed inside, doors and windows locked, watching the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling someone was out there, just out of view. By nightfall, the car had vanished, just like that figure from the previous night. I've been back several times since then, but everything's been normal. No mysterious lights, figures, or cars. Still, I can't forget how eerily quiet it was that night, or how that silent figure just stood there watching before disappearing without a trace. The night had settled fully by the time we reached the city limits. Karen and I had been mostly quiet since leaving that rest stop, both of us stealing glances at our mirrors. We kept checking for that man or that strange light rising behind a hill, but the desert stayed empty behind us. It had started with the radio. The static grew louder and louder until Karen just turned it off. That's when we noticed the crackling noise and that odd silence. We looked at each other and I asked, "Did you see that?" She grabbed my hand, nodding with wide eyes. The road stretched empty behind us. No cars, no lights, nothing. We drove in that thick quiet until I spotted a rest stop ahead. Just a small place with gas pumps and a tiny store surrounded by a cluster of lights. After I parked and cut the engine, we got out to stretch. The air felt heavy, wrong somehow. We kept looking around nervously, like something might jump out of the shadows. That's when I saw him. A man in a plain black suit standing by the payphones. His hair was slicked back, and in the dim light, his face was blank. The weird thing was, he wasn't using the phone. He just stood there, his lips moving, repeating one word, "Back." I looked away for a second, but when I turned back, he was still watching us. Karen saw him too and gave me a quick nod. We hurried back to the car and locked the doors. As we pulled away, he didn't move an inch from his spot. The silence felt even heavier as we drove on. The radio stayed dead for another 10 miles before suddenly coming back to life. All the stations worked perfectly after that. When I got home, I checked the missing people, nothing strange reported. But sometimes late at night while driving or sitting on my porch, I remember that light behind the hill and the man mouthing back at that rest stop. Maybe it was nothing, but I still wonder. That morning on the Pine Ridge Trail changed something in me. It's not a story I share often, not even with Karen. The memory sits quietly in the back of my mind, like the fog that hung between the trees that October day. The woods were different when I started my hike at 7 a.m. The crisp Vermont air held an unusual stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I'd hiked this northern trail before, but the familiar path felt strange from the moment I stepped onto it. The normal sounds of nature, birds calling, animals moving through the brush, were oddly absent. All I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching under my boots. About 2 miles in, something changed. At first, I dismissed the sound as an echo of my own footsteps or branches breaking in the distance. But then I noticed it. A mechanical clicking, like tiny metal gears turning. It wasn't natural, and it followed me. Every time I stopped and turned around, I saw nothing but empty trail and dense trees. The clicking would pause, then start again, always just out of sight. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something was loose in my pack. I checked every strap and pocket. Everything was secure. Even when I set my pack down and stood completely still, that faint mechanical tapping continued, hovering at the edge of hearing. The fog started lifting as sunlight filtered through the trees, but the clicking persisted. Something felt off, like unseen eyes were watching my every move. The familiar trail seemed longer that day, the forest more oppressive. Pride kept me from turning back, even as that strange pressure built. When I finally reached the parking lot, round noon, it was filling up with other hikers' cars. As I approached my Subaru near the entrance, I froze. A man in a crisp black suit, like something out of a movie but without a tie, stood right beside my car, his hair neat and precise. On the second evening of my solo camping trip near Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains, everything changed. I'd gone there seeking solitude, just me, my tent, and a few books in late September when the days were mild enough to enjoy without a jacket, but the nights carried that familiar mountain chill. I was about to put out my campfire after dinner, the stars just beginning to pierce the darkening sky, when I spotted it. Beyond the ridge, maybe a few hundred yards from my camp, a pale blue-white orb floated silently. It was roughly basketball-sized, glowing with an intense moonlight quality that somehow cast no shadows. Unlike any aircraft I'd seen, it didn't flash or blink, just drifted aimlessly at first, hovering above the ground. As I watched, trying to rationalize it as a drone or wayward lantern, the orb's movement changed. It picked up speed, gliding toward the ridge before vanishing behind the tree line. The forest stayed completely silent. No engine noise, no mechanical buzz, nothing. After a minute of stunned waiting, I decided to retreat to my tent. That's when I saw him. The man stood motionless, his suit impossibly pristine for the dirt lot. His hair slicked back, his face was blank, eyes fixed on nothing in particular as he absently brushed at non-existent dust on his shoulders. I approached cautiously, maintaining a safe distance, and managed a quiet, "Hi." He turned to me with deliberate slowness and gave a single nod. "That sound you heard," he said in a low, eerily calm voice, "it isn't for you." His words sent an involuntary shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the fog as if he'd never been real. The drive home was punctuated by moments of reflection at every stoplight and quiet stretch, thoughts of the clicking, the mysterious man, and those woods haunting me. I never heard that sound again, nor did I see the man in black elsewhere. To this day, I don't understand what the clicking was or who he was. Sometimes I think certain parts of the trail just aren't meant for human eyes, even when we think they are. A strange glow caught my eye while I was driving through the Mojave Desert one night. The sky was pitch black except for stars, and I was about 50 miles from the nearest town. The air was dry and cool, despite it being summer. I'd been on the road for hours, heading back to LA after visiting a friend in Nevada. The radio had long since faded to static. That's how far I was from civilization. Around midnight I spotted it, a faint light hovering above the desert floor but below the stars, off to my right. The glow was round and steady, about the size of a basketball. It wasn't flickering like a campfire or flare would. Instead, it pulsed softly with a white light. That's when I saw the car. It was parked roughly 50 yards away at the edge of my camping spot. Just a clean black sedan with no logos or decals. Though the headlights were off, I could see exhaust quietly pumping into the cold air from its idling engine. I hadn't heard it pull up, which was odd since the nearest road was at least a mile away. Something held me back from calling out. A man stepped out of the driver's side. Everything about him was precise. The dark suit buttoned all the way up, white shirt, thin black tie, and neat hair. His face showed no emotion as he walked toward me, stopping about 10 feet away. He looked straight into my eyes and said simply, "Some things aren't meant to be found." I tried to respond, but couldn't find my voice. He gave a single nod, returned to his car, and drove away slowly until his taillights vanished among the trees. For a long while, I stood there watching where he'd disappeared. The forest was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I debated whether to leave or stay, ultimately deciding to spend the night. Nothing else happened. When morning came, the clearing looked completely normal. No footprints except mine, no tire tracks, no evidence the car had ever been there. I packed up and left, my mind replaying the strange warning, the light, and the mysterious man as I wound my way down the mountain roads toward home. The desert night was perfectly still when I first noticed it. A strange orb of light hovering about 20 feet up in the air. My engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound breaking the silence after I'd pulled onto the shoulder. No wind stirred, no insects chirped, just that mysterious light, gently pulsing in the darkness. I got out but stayed close to my car, not wanting to venture too far. When I shined my flashlight toward it, the orb seemed to respond, dimming and brightening as if it could sense my presence. Despite the warm night, a strange chill ran through me. The man appeared without warning. One moment I was alone, the next he was walking toward me from the shadows. His black suit was immaculate, paired with a crisp white shirt. No tie. What struck me most was the silence. His shoes made no sound on the gravel as he approached. He stopped about 10 feet away, his pale, expressionless face fixed on mine with an unsettling intensity. Everything seemed frozen in that moment, just our breathing and the vast desert darkness around us. Without a word, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Forget what you saw. Keep driving," he said quietly, handing it to me. Then he turned and walked away, vanishing into the night as suddenly as he'd appeared. I realized the orb had disappeared too, as if it had never been there. I stood paralyzed for a moment before slowly unfolding the paper. Instead of a message, I found only a strange symbol. Something like a broken sun or a damaged compass, with uneven lines radiating from a circle. It wasn't any language I recognized, Just an odd, crude drawing. Back in my car, I drove on through the empty night, occasionally glancing at the paper. The symbol remained unchanged. No glowing, no transformation. Just that mysterious drawing that left me with so many questions. Who was that man? Why did he want me to forget? What was the meaning behind that symbol? I never saw the orb or the man in the black suit again. But on nights when I'm driving alone through the desert, I can't help scanning the darkness, wondering if that quiet, watching light is still out there somewhere. The forest keeps its secrets. That's what the mysterious man in the black sedan told me, and I still think about those words when I remember that strange fall afternoon in the Adirondacks. I'd picked Panther Gorge for my hike that day. Not a popular spot, but that's exactly why I chose it. It was quiet, remote, and unspoiled. The weather was getting cooler, and I wanted one last day on the trails before winter set in. The sky hung low and grey, casting everything in muted tones as I walked alone for several hours. The first sign that something was off came when I reached a narrow section of the trail. The trees grew denser there, turning the path into little more than a dirt track. What struck me most was the silence, complete and absolute. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. As I stood there listening, a bright flash lit up the woods just off the trail. It was like a camera flash, but stronger, gone in an instant. I looked toward where it came from, but saw only shadows. The silence followed me as I continued walking. My footsteps made no sound, and every time I thought I heard something, it disappeared before I could identify it. This went on for about 10 minutes, until the trail opened into a clearing near the road, back to the parking area. That's where I saw him. A man in a black sedan, engine idling without lights. He looked like a businessman, clean-shaven, dark, slick-back hair, black suit with an open-collared white shirt. His face was calm as he watched me approach through his open window. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried clearly. "You okay?" I told him I'd just finished hiking, my voice sounding strange in the still air. That's when he said it about the forest keeping its secrets, telling me to respect them. When I asked about the light and the silence I'd experienced, he just shook his head. "Not everything is meant to be understood," he said. "Sometimes the best thing is to walk away." The desert night stretched endlessly ahead as I drove my rig south on Highway 89. It was just after midnight, somewhere between Flagstaff and Prescott. The sky was clear, one of those dry, cool July nights that feel rare in these parts. No other trucks for miles, just me trying to make up time on a long haul that was running behind. I first saw it around 1:30 a.m., just past a stretch of sparse pine forest. Something odd caught my eye up ahead. What I initially thought was a police chopper or helicopter with its searchlight. But this was different. The light was too steady, too white, and the silence was striking. About 100 feet up, just off the road, hovered a roughly circular object. Its edges weren't sharp. They had this soft, fuzzy glow instead of being solid. No aircraft signals or blinking lights, just this steady white glow that seemed to pulse gently, almost like breathing. I pulled onto the shoulder and cut the engine. The object stood out crisp against the starlit sky. No clouds or haze to blur its outline. When I tried to take a picture with my phone, the screen went haywire, flickering before going black. A second attempt gave the same result. Setting my phone aside in frustration, I could only watch as the light slowly dimmed, like someone turning down a dimmer switch, until it vanished completely into the night. The words stuck in my throat when I tried to speak. Before any sound came out, he shut the window and started the car. I watched it pull away slowly, turn onto the road, and vanish around a bend. Standing there as the sun sank lower, I felt the cold seeping into my bones. Later, back at my car, the wood's silence still hung heavy around me. That strange flash, whatever I'd seen back there, it didn't feel natural. On the drive home, my mind kept circling back to the man, the car, and that unsettling quiet. None of it made any sense, and somehow, I wasn't sure I wanted it to. The night started normally enough on that desert highway, just coyotes howling in the distance and wind moving through the trees. Nothing seemed off until that strange light appeared. I wasn't scared exactly, just confused. I tried telling myself it was probably military testing or some weird light effect. The black sedan changed everything. It came up behind me fast, right after I'd started my engine to leave, stopping about 20 feet back. It looked like something straight out of a movie. Tinted windows, no plates I could see. The driver rolled down his window and spoke in this eerily calm voice. "You didn't see anything?" When I asked what he meant, he just said to keep my eyes on the road. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but his eyes were fixed on me through that window. Just as suddenly as it appeared, car vanished into the darkness. The weird part was there weren't even any tail lights. It was like it never existed. The empty highway stretched behind me, but that feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I kept checking my mirror the whole drive after that. Hours later at the Prescott truck stop, I discovered all my photos were gone. Not just deleted, but completely wiped from my phone. When I told other drivers about it, they either laughed it off or just shrugged. Maybe they didn't want to know more. That night changed something about that stretch of highway for me. I've driven it hundreds of times since, but it feels different now. I still don't know what that light was, or who that man in the black car was. It's one of those experiences that sticks with you, even though it feels like something you're not supposed to talk about. That night changed everything I knew about the stars above. I was in my backyard doing what I love most, taking pictures of the night sky. Nothing fancy, just me and my camera trying to capture the beauty up there. I've always been fascinated by constellations. Even though I'm far from being a professional photographer, the conditions seemed perfect. We'd had a light rain earlier, leaving behind a thin fog and cool, comfortable air. I'd positioned myself at the yard's edge, focusing on this star cluster I'd read about recently. Everything was normal at first, just me adjusting my camera settings, taking shots. Then it happened. A star vanished. Not gradually, not behind a cloud. It just switched off like someone had flipped a switch. I tried to rationalize it, but then another star went dark, and another. They were disappearing in sequence, following some kind of pattern I couldn't understand. The cluster kept dimming until barely any stars remained. I stood there, completely still, searching for any explanation. The yard was menderings bad. Silent, no planes overhead, no drones buzzing around, nothing from the neighbors. What happened next was even stranger. After about a minute, the stars started coming back on, exactly backwards from how they'd disappeared. The whole event lasted maybe 5 minutes, but time felt warped. My hands were trembling as I took a few final photos before retreating inside. I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was something in the atmosphere, or my eyes were tired, or my camera was acting up. The next day at work, things got even weirder. I'd barely started my morning shift at the local cafe where I'd been working for a couple years when I noticed them. 2 men in black suits, definitely not our usual customers, sitting silently in the corner. One wore sunglasses, despite the dim, early morning light. They just sat there, watching me, not ordering anything. The road back to my yard feels different now. Something's out there, watching, waiting. These days, I don't go stargazing alone anymore. The camping trip in the Cascade Mountains started like any other solo adventure. I'd spent that summer hiking alone, escaping work and city life. This time I found a quiet spot near a small lake, miles from the main trail. I didn't bother checking in at the ranger station. I never do. The isolation is what I seek. Late afternoon brought perfect camping weather. The air had that gentle late summer feel, warm but not hot. I pitched my tent before sunset and settled in after dinner, switching off my headlamp to watch stars twinkle between the pine branches. Then midnight came and everything changed. Those men showed up at the cafe afterward. 2 of them sat there my entire shift, motionless, watching. One wore sunglasses indoors. When I approached to offer coffee, the other one just said, "Just keeping watch, nothing more." They stayed all day, no phones, no books, just staring. The Founsa cafe felt smaller by the hour. They left when my shift ended, vanishing as mysteriously as they'd appeared. I haven't seen them since, but their presence lingers. Sometimes I catch a dark suit's reflection in the window during early morning shifts. Even in an empty cafe, that watched feeling remains. I keep thinking about those blinking stars and the men who seemed fixated on me. Maybe they're connected, maybe not. I've reviewed my photos and videos countless times. The stars definitely blinked, but nobody believes me. These days, I avoid stargazing. The sky feels hollow now, like it's hiding something. Or something's hiding in it. I'm left with no answers, just an unshakable feeling that some things we're not supposed to notice. And there are people making sure we don't look too closely. The morning I left the mountains, I found myself at an empty ranger station. Empty except for one man in a black suit sitting by the door. It was strange, seeing someone so formally dressed in the wilderness. He knew my name, Emily Parker, even though I hadn't checked in or told anyone my full name during the trip. When I asked who he was, he just smiled and said, "You should move on." Then he walked inside and vanished. I searched the building, but he was gone, along with the chair he'd been sitting in. This bizarre encounter came after an unsettling night in my tent. It started with what I thought was a raccoon or deer moving around outside, but the footsteps were different, Slow, measured, deliberate, they circled my tent in a pattern. Right side, back, left. I lay still, listening to them trace this careful path around me. Sometimes they'd pause right outside the tent fabric. I had my flashlight, but I didn't want to unzip the tent and scare away whatever was out there. For about 20 minutes, these footsteps continued their methodic circuit. Then everything went silent. The wind died, the usual forest sounds stopped, and a heavy quiet pressed against the tent walls. When the footsteps finally started again, they were slower, gradually fading into the trees. I couldn't sleep after that. The forest that usually brought me comfort felt different, alien. Something about those footsteps, that man in the suit, the way he disappeared. None of it felt exactly threatening, but it was deeply wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains themselves were trying to tell me something, warning me away. Something was watching me, and I decided to listen. I packed up early and left. Late one summer evening, I found myself in the mountains near Bend, Oregon. The day had started with a simple hike, but I decided to stay until nightfall to photograph stars and catch any interesting light on the mountaintops. The weather was perfect, clear skies, slightly cold after sunset, with that familiar mountain scent of pine needles and dry grass in the air. Around 9 o'clock, something caught my eye while I was adjusting my basic DSLR camera on its tripod near a clearing. Far off on the ridge, strange lights danced in an unusual pattern. These weren't your typical aircraft lights, or steady beacons from towers. They weren't anything like a campfire either. Instead, they moved with an eerie precision, flowing smoothly like waves, left to right, up and down. No sound accompanied them, just silent, rhythmic movement. I started recording, wondering if I was seeing some kind of drone show, or maybe light reflecting off something. But the pattern seemed too intentional, too calculated. After about 10 minutes of filming and trying to zoom in for a better look, I heard footsteps behind me. What happened next still feels surreal. Two men in black suits stood there, completely out of place in the remote wilderness, miles from any road. They watched me silently until one spoke, asking to see my footage. When I handed over my camera, they crouched down to study the screen. One man took out a phone and recorded my footage like they were documenting it. My questions about their identity went unanswered. After reviewing the video several times, the apparent leader looked up and simply said, "This is not your story to tell." Before I could respond, they exchanged glances, stood up and vanished into the darkness like shadows. I haven't returned to that spot since, and if I ever do, I'll definitely let someone know where I'm going first. I woke up disoriented in my car, pulled over on a lonely stretch of highway in northern Oregon. My head throbbed, and everything felt hazy. The last clear memory I had was buying coffee at a gas station, about an hour earlier. After that, nothing. Just a complete blank. No recollection of driving or why I'd stopped. When I checked my phone, I found it cracked and dead. The car started fine though, so I figured I'd just continue home. That's when the black sedan appeared, pristine and showroom new, with windows tinted pitch black. It pulled up behind me, blocking my exit from the shoulder. The driver's window rolled down smoothly. Inside was a man in his late 30s or early 40s wearing a black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. His face was expressionless as he spoke in a low, measured voice. "Not yet." When I asked what he meant, he simply said I shouldn't be driving right now. Something in his tone made me pause. Later, I tried to document what happened with my camera, but every video file was corrupted. They'd open briefly, then dissolve into static. Recovery tools were useless. The footage was completely gone. Without proof, my friends dismiss it as just some strange lights or an overactive imagination. I've avoided those mountains at Nitri and T ever since. Sometimes I look up at that ridge and wonder if those lights might return, but deep down, I know I'm not meant to find out. The memory stays with me though, those lights, the men in black, that calm but firm warning. It all feels too real to forget. Two men in black suits cornered me on the highway, and my whole world turned sideways. I sat in my car trying to make sense of it all, but there was this maddening gap in my memory, just a headache and a blank space where answers should be. The first guy appeared at my window, all businesslike with dark hair and a serious face. "Sit tight. Someone will come for you soon," he said. His partner stepped out of their black sedan, a mirror image in style and demeanor. My fingers found the door locks without thinking, heart pounding against my ribs. "You saw something you shouldn't have. That's why you're here," the first one told me. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? I couldn't remember half of my day. When I told them this, the second man moved closer, his expression empty but intense. That will change. We'll help you remember. Just relax. I wanted to floor it, escape this nightmare, but my body wouldn't listen. The air felt thick, pressing down on my chest. They didn't make any threats, yet their presence was like a physical weight. The first man pulled out a notebook, wrote something, and showed it to me. "Where were you around 10 p.m. last night?" "I was at home," I said, frowning. He nodded slowly, exchanged looks with his partner. "And yet you were seen somewhere you didn't belong." My voice shook as I asked what they meant. The second man responded by pulling out a small silver badge. Just a plain metal rectangle, no words or logos. "You're going to want to cooperate." The highway stretched endlessly around us, the sun beating down until sweat ran down my neck. When I demanded answers, able, out. Why they were there, the first man smiled. Real, but just the tiniest edge of it. "To make sure you stay quiet." His partner returned to their car while he stayed watching me, adding, "You'll remember soon." My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I tried to understand what was happening. What had I seen? Who were these men? The distant hum of traffic was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything changed. I was on my usual drive home from work through New Richmond, Wisconsin, past the coal-fired power plant everyone jokes about but depends on. The air had that damp autumn chill that sticks to your skin as night creeps in. Around 7 p.m. I noticed something strange over the power plant. Lights that didn't belong there. Not the normal work lights or warning beacons we all knew. These were different. Smaller, brighter, moving in patterns that made no sense. They drifted slowly, methodically, like they were examining the facility. I pulled over, killed my headlights, and cracked my window. The familiar smell of burning coal and ozone mixed with something else, something metallic and sharp that I'd never smelled before. The lights kept blinking in what looked like some kind of pattern or code. When I tried to grab my phone for a picture, the screen went haywire, so I gave up and just watched. A black sedan appeared and backed up slowly before speeding away, leaving me alone on the shoulder. The quiet came back, but something felt off, like the air had gotten heavier, filled with an invisible presence. I stayed put for a while before finally driving home in complete silence, checking my mirror the whole way for that black car. When I got home and saw it was 3 p.m., I realized there was this huge gap in my memory from the night before, somehow connected to those men in black. I never reported it or told anyone. How could I? Nothing about it made sense. All I knew was that I'd been watched, maybe even controlled, and it wasn't over. Now and then, I still catch glimpses of a black car, just at the edge of my vision, always when I'm alone, always for a split second. And somehow, I know they're not finished with me. A dark shape pulled up behind my car as I watched those strange lights move along the power plant's perimeter. The engine was eerily quiet. No headlights visible in my mirror. I'd been tracking the lights as they drifted near the cooling towers before vanishing behind them. The driver's window rolled down. A man peered out, clean-shaven, slick black hair, mid-40s, wearing a dark suit that seemed out of place for this area. His smile was stiff, his voice professionally cold when he said evening. No badge, no introduction. "Do you work at the power plant?" he asked. I told him no, explained I worked downtown on Main Street, just passing through. He nodded, and that's when a second car silently appeared. Another man stepped out, nearly identical. Black suit, clean-shaven, unnaturally pale. They questioned me about the lights. Time? 7:10. Location? Northern cooling towers. Duration? About 5 minutes before they disappeared. Any workers around? No, just the lights. The second man joined in, hands folded, while the first leaned closer to my window. "Mind if we check your phone?" the first man asked. When I refused, he didn't push it, which somehow felt worse. I told them I was just a curious local who'd seen something unusual. The second man spoke slowly about keeping quiet. "The company is already handling it," he said. When I asked which company, he clarified. The power plant's management wanted discretion. The first man pulled out what looked like a government ID, though I couldn't make out the details in the dark. His final words were flat. "Thank you for your cooperation." It happened during a late September hike in the northern Adirondacks. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, with leaves just starting to change and that distinct smell of pine and wet earth in the air. The strange events began that night when 2 cars without license plates stopped. After a brief exchange between the men, they drove off one after the other, leaving the road quiet again. I sat there, trying to shake an unsettling feeling of being watched. The power plant had returned to its usual state. Just the orange glow from the towers, no extra lights or movement. My boyfriend Mark brushed it off when I told him the next day. He suggested they were probably government agents or security, just keeping tabs on potential rumors spreading. But what followed made me less certain. Strange things started happening. My phone began acting up, dropping calls and messages for no reason. During a daytime drive past the plant, I spotted a black SUV with impossibly dark tinted windows parked near the gate. Empty driver's seat, just sitting there. One night around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my apartment window. When I checked, no one was there, but the streetlight flickered oddly and that metallic smell returned. I started taking a longer route home from work, adding 20 minutes to avoid that stretch of road. I didn't want another encounter with those lights or the men in black. Things quieted down for a while until one night at the office. Working alone around 10 p.m., I glimpsed a dark figure under a street lamp across the street. It vanished when I looked again. I still think about everything, the lights, those men, the badge I never clearly saw. It feels like I stumbled onto something bigger, something I wasn't meant to see. Maybe it's better not knowing. These days I still pass the plant occasionally, but I don't stop anymore. And I keep what I saw to myself. In an old guidebook from a dusty outdoor shop in Saranac Lake, I found markings for an abandoned cabin that wasn't on any official maps. Local hikers had mentioned it, so I decided to plan a 2-day camping trip to check it out. The cabin was exactly where the book said it would be. When I arrived at 3 p.m., I saw a small, weathered structure with broken windows and a sagging porch that looked untouched for decades. I chose to set up my tent near some fir trees a short distance away. The forest was peaceful, just birds calling and wind rustling through branches as I explored the surrounding area. Around 7 p.m. after dinner, I walked back toward the cabin in the twilight. The sky had deepened to a dark blue when something caught my eye. A pure white orb floating about 2 feet off the ground, roughly 30 yards from the cabin. It wasn't harsh or flickering, more like it was gently glowing from within. The forest had gone oddly quiet, different from its usual silence. I froze, wondering if it might be a lantern or abandoned campfire, but there was no heat, no smoke, no sound at all. For about 5 minutes, I stood watching it. Then the orb began moving slowly toward the cabin, gliding silently just above the ground. It paused briefly near a broken window on the porch before vanishing completely. Sleep was hard to come by that night. A strange, soft humming seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. By morning, I'd had enough and packed up early. On my way back to the trailhead where my car was parked, I spotted a man at the forest's edge. He wore a black suit, the kind you'd see at a funeral or business meeting, which seemed completely out of place in the wilderness. His dark hair was slicked back, and his expression was eerily blank but intense. When I slowed down, he called out, "Hey!" I stopped and said, "Hi." He took starter, "Hi." A few steps toward me but maintained his distance. The old radio tower stood at the edge of Millbrook, a small upstate New York town. I worked the late shift there, managing emergency broadcasts and keeping the signal running for nearby communities. The tower wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top. That November night started routinely. The fog rolled in thick and heavy from the river. A mile away as I arrived at 9 p.m., I grabbed my jacket and made my way up the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. By then, condensation had already streaked the windows and the night had settled into a deep quiet. Only the soft hum of equipment and occasional transmitter beeps broke the silence. I was doing my midnight checks when he appeared. "You've been dreaming," he said matter-of-factly. I blinked in confusion. "What?" "The things you saw last night. The light, the cabin." He glanced at the trees beyond the tower. "That wasn't real. You need to leave before dark. Don't return." His words annoyed me. I knew what I'd seen was real. I wasn't making anything up. He smiled coldly, his eyes remaining empty. "Dreams can feel real sometimes, but this is different. You shouldn't be here." I wanted to ask about his strange clothes, who he was, but something in his manner stopped me. His quiet, steady voice made arguing seem futile. "Look, I'm just hiking," I insisted. "I'm not hurting anything." "That's not the point," he replied, and added, "Thank you for your discretion." He turned and vanished into the forest shadows. The days afterward, I felt watched whenever I was alone. Sometimes in the woods quiet, I'd catch glimpses of faint lights flickering beyond the trees. I avoided that section of trail and rarely spoke about what happened. It's one of those experiences that defied logic yet somehow made sense, and I'm still trying to understand it all. The strange events began with the static. At first, it seemed normal enough, the kind of interference you'd expect from bad weather or a weak station. But this was different. The noise grew stronger, like someone was deliberately pushing through with their own signal. Not a code or any message I knew. Just this weird, drawn-out hiss that didn't fit. I tried clearing it up, playing with the dials, but that strange white noise kept filling the room. Something about it felt purposeful, unlike regular interference. When I stopped transmitting to listen more carefully, that's when everything changed. Through the window, past the fog covering the tower's metal catwalk, I spotted him, a man in a black suit and tie. Not at all what you'd expect to see up here in the cold. His face was oddly smooth and pale in the dim light, his hair slicked back. The strangest thing was how he moved, or rather, didn't move. He just stood there, completely still, except for one raised hand, palm facing me, clearly gesturing to stop. The static was still there, filling every corner as I stared at this figure. I blinked, thinking the fog and dim light were playing tricks on me. But he remained watching me with fixed eyes that I couldn't quite tell were dark or just reflecting the control panel's glow. When I tried reaching for the radio to transmit again, maybe call out to him, the static suddenly surged, drowning out my voice with a harsh burst, almost like the radio itself was warning me. My heart pounding, I grabbed my jacket and watched him a moment longer. Then he simply turned and stepped off into the fog, vanishing completely. I sat there for what felt like hours, just listening to the mix of static, silence, and the tower's quiet machinery. The radio never fully cleared up. The morning shift didn't believe my story when I told them. They brushed it off as fatigue, or the fog playing tricks with my mind. That night was just the beginning. I was parked at a truck stop between Albuquerque and Gallup on Interstate 40. Taking a breather around 4:30 a.m., the sky was barely starting to lighten, and everything felt wrapped in that early morning quiet. I'd stopped for coffee and a quick rest before continuing my drive. My phone started behaving strangely over the next few days. Nothing worked right. Calls dropped, blank texts sent themselves, and the screen would show static flashes, even when turned off. I felt eyes on me everywhere I went, especially while driving home after dark. One night changed everything. I was walking to my car in the parking lot behind the tower when I spotted this black sedan. It stood out immediately, too pristine, too polished for our area where most people drove pickup trucks and older cars. As I got closer, two men in dark suits stepped out, wearing the same kind of suits as the man from the tower. They moved with purpose but weren't rushing. One of them looked right at me and nodded. My stomach tightened when they approached. "You need to be careful what you say," one told me in a serious, quiet voice. "Some things are better left alone." They drove off before I could respond, leaving me alone in the swirling fog. Things got worse after that. The static intensified, my broadcasts became unreliable, and I started hearing whispers on the radio when I'd sign off. Nothing clear, but definitely there. I kept thinking about that man outside the window, his movements, and that warning. Though I never saw those men again, I couldn't shake their presence. Every tower climb felt watched, like the fog itself was waiting. The static eventually cleared up and broadcasts went back to normal, but that uneasy feeling stayed. Now on foggy nights when the wind blows just right, I still hear that hiss coming through the radio, soft but steady, like a warning from the woods. I pulled into the truck stop just before dawn, the lot nearly deserted, with only a few rigs dotted here and there. The convenience store hadn't opened yet, so I stepped out to stretch my legs under a sky still scattered with stars. The air felt unusually crisp for the season. That's when I noticed the strange light. It cut across the horizon, maybe a few hundred feet up, moving faster than any aircraft I'd ever seen in all my years of nighttime driving. No sound came from it, no engine noise, nothing. Just this silent object traveling in a perfect straight line before vanishing behind a western ridge. I'd seen plenty of planes, helicopters, and satellites during my long hauls, but this was different. When it appeared again, it gave off a single flash, like a signal, then disappeared completely. The whole thing left me unsettled. By the time the store opened at 5 a.m., daylight was starting to creep in. I headed inside for coffee, still mulling over what I'd witnessed. The store was empty except for one customer, a man who stuck out like a sore thumb. He sat in the back, wearing a crisp black suit and white shirt, his shoes polished to a shine. Everything about him seemed too neat, too precise for a truck stop. He was older, maybe late 50s, clean-shaven, with this rigid way of sitting that put me on edge. I tried not to stare while ordering my coffee, But as I walked to the tables, he appeared right next to me out of nowhere. "Quite a night for watching the skies," he said in this eerily controlled voice that made me tense up. When I mentioned what I'd seen, the silent, fast-moving light, he just nodded like he'd expected my answer. "Not many people notice," he told me. "Most explain it away as something ordinary, but sometimes." His voice trailed off as I glanced around the empty store, suddenly very aware we were alone. "The encounter at the truck stop still bothers me. That mysterious man in the suit, Mr. Gray, showed up right after I'd seen something impossible in the desert sky. He spoke in riddles, leaning in close like we were sharing secrets, warning me that some things are better left unsaid. It all started during my solo hike in the San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Los Angeles. I'd picked a trail between Eaton Canyon and Mount Wilson, wanting a peaceful afternoon to clear my head. The weather was perfect, warm but crisp, with just a few wispy clouds hanging near the horizon. I set out around 3 p.m., planning for a few hours of exploration before sunset. The trail grew quieter as I went deeper past the main junction. Most hikers had turned back early, leaving me alone as I made my way toward a ridge overlooking the valley. Around 5:30, I stopped in a clearing for some water. That's when I noticed something strange to the east. At first, I dismissed it as a helicopter. Days later, at that truck stop, Mr. Gray appeared. His eyes swept the ceiling as he chose his words carefully, telling me not every sighting should be reported. Not everything needs explaining. When I pressed him about his knowledge, he gave me an unfriendly smile. "I'm here to help people understand when to speak up and when to stay quiet," he said. Before disappearing, he handed me a business card. Blank except for a phone number and his name. The whole thing felt wrong. Why would someone in a suit show up at a random truck stop to warn me about keeping quiet? I told a trucker friend the next day, but he just laughed it off as a drone or military test. I know what I saw wasn't normal. That number remains uncalled. I don't want to know more. But driving through the desert at night, I can't shake the memory of that silent, fast light. Maybe Mr. Gray was right about things being better left untold. I was hiking alone when something caught my eye above the ridge. At first, I thought it was a news helicopter hovering a few hundred feet above the treetops. But this was different. A smooth, metallic, oval-shaped object with no wings or rotors. It floated there in complete silence, shimmering strangely in the low sunlight, like metal coated in oil or mercury. I managed to take a few photos with my phone, zooming in as much as possible. Then the object simply vanished. No sound, no movement, just disappeared like a light being switched off. I stood frozen, scanning the ridge but seeing nothing. No aircraft, no drone, absolutely nothing. A mix of excitement and disbelief washed over me as I looked around for other witnesses, but I was alone. Still processing what I'd seen, I started walking back down on autopilot. By the time I reached the parking lot around 6:45 p.m., the sun was setting. That's when I noticed two men standing near my car. They seemed completely out of place. Both wore black suits with white shirts and black ties. Their hair perfectly styled as if they'd just stepped out of an advertisement. The taller one had sharp, gaunt features, while his shorter, stockier companion wore dark glasses despite the dim light. Without introducing themselves, one of them asked if I'd taken any photos. When I admitted to capturing pictures of something strange near the ridge, the taller man's eyes narrowed slightly. They demanded I delete the photos for everyone's safety. When I questioned why, the shorter man flatly told me to forget what I'd seen and keep quiet about it. My stomach tightened as I protested, saying I couldn't just do that. They exchanged a brief look before the taller one leaned in close, speaking softly but firmly. His words were clear. This wasn't a request but a command. Delete the photos. Stay quiet. Move on. I found myself staring at my phone, swallowing hard as I faced their serious expressions. I never expected my evening hike to end with two men in black suits telling me to delete photos from my phone. The images weren't even that clear, just some blurry shots of a metallic shape against the sky. But they were real, and those men knew it. They approached me in the parking lot, looking like something out of a bad movie. When I stepped back and asked if it was a joke, they didn't laugh. The shorter one pulled out a small black device I couldn't identify. "We don't want to escalate this," he said. "You cooperate and nothing happens." I raised my hands, told them I was just a hiker. After a long stare, the taller one nodded to his partner. They walked to their dark sedan, started the engine, and drove away. My hands were shaking as I stood there in the empty lot. I looked at the photos again, debating whether to delete them. Part of me wanted to hold on to the evidence, even though I knew I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. That night was mostly sleepless. the encounter feeling like a strange dream, except the photos were still there and my memory was crystal clear. The next day brought no answers. No news reports about unusual sightings, no government statements, nothing about missing persons or accidents. I drove back to the trailhead, hoping to find some clue, but found only an empty parking lot. The ridge was quiet and normal when I hiked up. No lights, no metallic shapes, no men in black. I told a few close friends about meeting the men, but kept quiet about what I'd photographed. Nobody really believed me, and I didn't try to convince them. Weeks passed, but I kept thinking about those two men, how natural they seemed, like they dealt with this sort of thing all the time. Eventually, I deleted the photos. Not because I wanted to be UT, because it felt safer. Now, whenever I'm hiking or looking at the sky, I catch myself wondering, are they still watching to make sure I stay quiet? Is that strange object still out there, hiding behind some ridge, waiting for someone else to spot it? The lake's surface mirrored the stars perfectly that spring evening at Lake Penderale. I'd driven out to this quiet spot in northern Idaho after work, looking to unwind and maybe get some photos. The public fishing area, accessed by a gravel road, was empty, typical for a weekday after dark. The air had that crisp bite that makes your breath visible, but the sky stayed clear. Armed with just my phone and camera, I settled in for some long exposure shots of the water and night sky. The solitude was exactly what I needed, but about an hour into my peaceful evening, something caught my attention. Strange lights dancing above the tree line across the lake. These weren't your typical aircraft lights. They shifted colors randomly, red to green to pale blue, like LED party lights without any pattern. They floated just above the trees, moving in ways that defied explanation. Not quite natural, not quite man-made. No sound carried across the water, ruling out drones or boats. I started recording on my phone, zooming in to capture whatever this was. After about 10 minutes of filming, the lights disappeared behind a thick stand of firs. Curious about what I'd captured, I sat on a rock and reviewed the footage. Despite the grainy quality, those uneven, color-shifting lights were clearly visible. When I tried sending the video to some friends who'd appreciate it, things took a strange turn. The signal was weak, and my phone started acting up. The screen glitched and flickered with distorted colors. Apps crashed repeatedly. 2 reboots didn't fix anything. Then the GPS failed. I had cellular data, but couldn't get my locale on maps. Thinking I'd hit a dead zone, I decided to head back to my truck. As I packed up my gear, the unusual quiet of the forest started to sink in. The night I ran into those men changed everything. I was heading back to my truck after filming by the lake, walking through an eerily silent forest. No birds, no distant traffic, just my boots crunching on pine needles. They were waiting by my truck when I got there. 2 guys in black suits without ties, wearing sunglasses in the dark. One was tall, with slicked-back, thin hair. The other had this square jaw and a stone-cold face. They didn't bother with hello. "Are you the one who took the videos near the lake?" the tall one asked. His voice was steady but left no room for argument. When I said yes and asked how they knew, he just nodded slightly. They started talking about my phone, which had been acting weird since I left the lake. The square-jawed one stepped up and pulled out some strange electronic devices from a black case. They kept insisting they needed to take my phone to fix some technical issue that could cause problems. When I refused, the tall one's voice got darker. Sometimes things like this don't end well if mishandled. Something felt very wrong about the whole thing. These guys appearing out of nowhere, dressed like that, demanding my phone right after I'd recorded something strange by the lake. I told them I had to leave and got in my truck, ignoring their warnings. As I drove away, I could see them in my mirror, just standing there watching me. My phone kept flickering the whole way home until the screen finally went black. No matter what I tried, it wouldn't turn back on. When I got home, I still couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. We were headed to a cabin near Lake Champlain, taking a leisurely drive through north to a sunset with that deep blue sky that holds onto the last bits of daylight. The road was wet from earlier rain and fog was rolling in around the trees. Jess was driving while I handled navigation. Both of us quiet, just taking in the peaceful sound of tires on wet asphalt. 20 minutes from our turnoff, we passed a basic rest area, just gravel, some picnic tables, and trash bins. Something caught my eye. A dark sedan parked strangely under a flickering orange lamp. Later that night, I tried charging my phone, but it wouldn't respond. Other electronics in the house started acting weird too. Dimming lights, dropping Wi-Fi signals, small things, but noticeable. The next day, I got this strange call. "We're calling regarding your device," said a clipped voice, identifying himself as Mr. Moore, as Mr. Monion's Terre. as Mr. Bring state Harper. Before I could ask questions, he just said I'd be contacted again and to cooperate. The line went dead, and my callback went nowhere. After that call, the electronic glitches stopped. My phone finally turned on, but every video from that night, and even older ones, had vanished, like they'd been wiped clean. I never heard from those mysterious people again, but it still bothers me. Why those lights? Why did my phone act up? And what made them so interested in footage from a quiet lake? The whole experience feels somewhere between reality and a dream I can't shake off. But I'm certain about what I saw. The trip was meant to be relaxing. Just us, the woods, and maybe some hiking. We'd spent hours getting away from the city, driving through stretches where the road cuts through forest with barely anything else around. The cold, damp air and growing darkness added to the isolation. We noticed the car at the rest stop as we drove past. Something wasn't right about it. A black sedan parked at an odd angle, facing the forest. I nudged Jess, pointing it out. The positioning suggested someone who wasn't planning to stay, or maybe someone watching something in the woods. A man emerged from the driver's side as we slowed down. He cut an imposing figure in his formal attire, dark suit, white shirt, black tie, all perfectly pressed. His slicked back hair and pale complexion stood out in the dim light. Middle-aged, probably mid-50s, with an unreadable expression that wasn't quite friendly but wasn't hostile either. He just stood there, silent and still, staring directly at us. Jess brought the car almost to a stop and asked softly if he was okay. After a moment's pause, he took one slow step toward the road, his eyes fixed on ours. "Turn back," he said in a steady, matter-of-fact voice. "Turn back before it's too late." The warning caught me off guard. When I asked what he meant, he didn't respond. Instead, he stepped backward toward the shadows at the edge of the rest area. What happened next was strange. He didn't run or walk away, but seemed to fade into the darkness, his figure blending with the night until he vanished completely. We sat frozen for a long moment before Jess locked the doors. Her eyes wide with fear, she whispered, asking if he'd really disappeared. I wanted to rationalize it, suggest he'd just walked into the trees or around a corner, but I honestly wasn't sure what I'd seen. The rest of our drive felt different, heavier. We kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see that black sedan following us, but the road behind remained empty. When we finally reached the cabin, even the familiar forest sounds felt ominous. The wind in the pines, the nighttime birds, all seemed more watchful than before. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, wishing I'd captured something on my phone, but the battery was dead. I couldn't shake the memory of that strange warning and the man who delivered it. Something shifted in the forest that night, and the effects lingered long after we left. It started with strange electrical glitches, my phone going dead with bursts of static, the cabin's power cutting in and out despite clear weather, and Jess's watch stopping completely, even though it had a full charge. These odd disturbances followed us for 2 days after our encounter. When I returned to the rest area the next morning, I found only tire tracks in the gravel, disappearing into the woods. The thick fog and dim light made it hard to see much else, and there were no footprints or other signs of the man or his black sedan. I snapped some photos on my phone anyway, more out of habit and hope of catching anything. That same day, Jess told me about a dream that had shaken her. She'd been walking down a road when a disembodied voice called out for her to stop. The feeling from that dream haunted her all day, she said. We ended up cutting our trip short, leaving a day earlier than planned. The drive home was quiet. I kept checking the mirrors, part of me expecting to see that black car or catch a glimpse of the man's face among the trees. Looking back now, the whole experience feels almost unreal, like something you'd see in a dream or a shadow you'd mistake for something else. But certain details won't fade: the electronic malfunctions, Jess's unsettling dream, and that warning voice telling us to turn back. The forest felt different after that night, and I still wonder what exactly we encountered out there. I don't see any text to rewrite. Could you please share the original text that you would like me to restructure into a new paragraph format? Once you provide the text, I'll help reorganize it while maintaining the same meaning and information.